Hey, Whitney.
Yes?
Do your best Jaws impersonation.
Well, here's to us.
Is that Richard Kiel?
That's Richard Kiel at the end of Moonraker.
That's cute.
Yeah. Greetings, friends. Welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow
Here it comes.
and lowbrow collide. I love that.
I love that, too.
I love the fiery ball of death that always waits outside the door. My name is Witney Seibold. I am a film critic of some stripe. I write for The Internet. I recently wrote a written review of Sherlock Gnomes,
Well done.
which is probably the height of my career.
Well done indeed.
And I am also the co-host of Cancel Too Soon, another podcast. But that's as may be. Who are you?
My name is William Bibbiani. I am also a critic for the internet. I also published a written review of Sherlock Gnomes this week. We'll talk about why that's significant for me when we get to talking about Sherlock Gnomes. And actually, this is a really jam-packed episode. We have a lot of new releases to cover. Because it is the last week of the month, we're also reviewing an entire motion picture franchise as chosen by the good folks at the Schmoville Facebook page. This month, y'all picked all the Jaws movies.
All four of them.
So we're going to be reviewing the Jaws movies later, but we're also going to be reviewing the new releases, Pacific Rim Uprising, Unsane, Sherlock Gnomes, Isle of Dogs, Final Portrait, and Game Over Man. So kind of a long one. Let's just get cracking, shall we?
Okay, have a walnut and we'll get cracking.
Crunchy, crunchy.
Or we'll watch Clash of the Titans and get cracking. Get it?
Get out. You get out right now. I need a new co-host.
I'm sorry.
I just pull in Roka from like
I went to go see a movie at a theater recently, and they had posters for Pacific Rim Uprising, and the tagline for Pacific Rim Uprising is "Rise Up."
I hate that.
Yeah,
that's so lazy.
And it reminded me of, this brings it back to Clash of the Titans. When Clash of the Titans was remade, the tagline, do you remember it?
Titans will clash.
Titans will clash. Well, that's implicit in the title, so can you come up with something maybe a little more creative?
Yeah.
How about Bubo's not in it? But then no one will see the movie, so...
My personal favorite was for the movie Safe House with Ryan Reynolds and Denzel Washington. The tagline was, "No one is safe."
Safe house, no one is safe.
You can't do that, so it's not a safe house.
Well, they're just pointing out the irony in their title in case you were too dim to get it while watching the movie.
I just feel like you never see that with anything else. Can you imagine, like, if you saw a poster for Boogie Nights and it said, "Tonight, no one boogies." Then why?
Boogie Nights, no more dancing.
What? In the mood for love. Tonight, no one's in the mood for love.
Blood's simple. It's terribly complex.
Actually, it is.
Yeah, indeed.
Touche. Yeah, there we go. Pacific Rim Uprising, I guess, is the biggest, brawniest release of the week.
Budget release of the week, anyway.
Yeah, it is a sequel to Guillermo del Toro's very ambitious, very expensive, giant robot versus giant monster movie. Came out, I think, in 2013.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about it was it had all of this pizzazz around it. It was
jam-packed with mythology, that movie.
Tons of mythology.
To the point of leaving you cross-eyed.
But here's the thing. It wasn't based on anything. All of the big blockbusters of that regard, for the most part, have been adaptations of comic books, movies, whatever. Pacific Rim evoked a lot of Godzilla in particular and a bunch of anime, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gundam, whatever. No. But it was its own thing.
Who makes a cameo in Uprising? Did you see Gundam?
Yeah, Gundam.
There?
Gundam's there. It's cute. Not really. Don't get excited. It's not a shared universe.
It's not a Gundam crossover.
It's just a reference to Gundam, and it's cute. Regardless, it had a huge budget. It had a huge marketing push. There were toys, and I'll say this right now, although the problem with that movie is it's basically just this huge exposition dump, and they hardly have any time to do anything but do exposition, I still really dig that movie. There's a lot of things I think it did really, really well, and I was looking forward to a sequel because
You think you could streamline it a little bit
Yeah,
more.
now that everything's been introduced, because it's kind of like a complicated world that they've introduced, because it's not just like monsters attack, it's monsters attack, and then 8 other things happened, and then the story starts. So you have to get a lot of information across. So I was like, okay, now that we've introduced all of this complicated mythology in a movie that, it's a little too dense for its own good, but was a fun and thrilling sci-fi adventure, now that we've done that, now we can have a sequel, and we can just take these characters that we've met, who are good actors, and just let them tell a story with that, with all these giant monsters, and we won't have to constantly reintroduce everything. Irony!
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The Pacific Rim Uprising makes the exact same mistake as the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels did. Pirates of the Caribbean was another one of those films that there was just too much of it. There were way too many characters, there were a lot of different plot lines, and it was terribly popular, defying all odds. People didn't expect it to be as popular as it was. And so they said, well, why don't we just make a sequel? In fact, we're going to make one gigantic 6-hour, 2-part mega sequel that is essentially one gigantic movie to follow up that first one, assuming that the thing that drew audiences to the first Pirates of the Caribbean was its complexity. It's not.
It was never its complexity.
It was its tone, it was its fun, swashbuckling set pieces, it was a few of the characters.
Yeah.
When you make a sequel, that's your chance to trim off all the fat. That's when you make the 90-minute film that the first one ought to have been.
Yeah, it's not your goal right now to make it more dense, more complicated, and say that every little... That's my problem with the Pirates sequels, especially the first two. Every little tiny detail that was just kind of fun because it was a quirky little tidbit in this little world.
It's now significant.
Now it's important. Like, it used to be kind of funny that Jack was such a bad pirate that even his compass was broken. Turns out it's a magic compass.
And it's not pointing toward north.
It points towards whatever he's looking for. Oh, you know those little fun little baubles he has in his hair? That's actually the totem for him being a pirate king. What?
Yeah.
Shut up.
Pacific Rim Uprising isn't quite that bad.
No, it is not.
But it does rely a little bit too heavily on the complexity of the mythology. And luckily, it doesn't necessarily rely on you remembering huge swaths of information from the first one. You can't remember all that stuff. There's just too much of it. But it does, sadly, kind of have to reiterate and re-explore a lot that kind of cluttered up the first movie.
And they kind of shot themselves in the foot there, because what happened was when it came time to make Pacific Rim Uprising, they actually couldn't get the lead actor from Pacific Rim, Charlie Hunnam.
Fine.
Well, yes, but no. Yes, but no, because here's the thing. He was, like, along with Mako Mori, his co-star in Pacific Rim, played by
Rinko
Kikuchi, thank you. I didn't want to mess up her name. They were the emotional kind of center of it, and everything else around them was just plot.
Yeah.
That was the thing. So we had already developed some sort of relationship with them and their story, and indeed, there were a lot of ideas and storylines that had been set up for them to explore over multiple films. His relationship with his dead brother, his connection with his dead brother in The Drift, which is the sort of mental connection where people share each other's memories. All of that, even Mako Mori's, journey through sort of an overprotective father who doesn't want her to become a warrior, but her great desire to prove herself, make something of herself, and deal with her own baggage. You've established all of that. Took a whole movie to establish all of that, and now we can play with all of that. And now Charlie Hunnam isn't in the movie, and Rinko Kikuchi is in it for 3 scenes. And I was so mad about that. I understand Charlie Hunnam wasn't available. Rinko Kikuchi was. She should have been the protagonist of this.
The problem is this whole notion, the Jaegers, the giant robots that the humans pilot in order to fight off the monsters that are coming out of a dimensional portal in the bottom of the Pacific. They're so complicated that they require 2 pilots, and in order to control these machines, the 2 pilots have to be psychically linked. Okay, that's a neat idea, I guess, but I think that's explored a little too deeply. You can just sort of have little bits of dialogue saying, I have a childhood memory of yours, or, wow, that was a really weird trauma you had as a child, and we'll say something like, yeah, let's not talk about that. And you can have a good relationship when in dialogue through the way the characters interact. they have to take a lot of time to have these really abstract psychedelic sequences where they're like sort of going into each other's brains and we're seeing flashbacks through how they're sort of linking up. And I understand you want to dramatize that rather than just talking about it through dialogue, but it stops the film right in a moment where they're sort of gearing up to get this machine going.
Well, I think this is something that's worth noting about Guillermo del Toro as a director. First off, again, if you haven't heard, we talked about Shape of Water a bunch of times already because it came out very recently. But I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro, but I think it's also fair to say, for better and sometimes for worse, he's a very indulgent filmmaker.
That's for sure.
When he likes something, when he thinks something is neat, he will dedicate all the time in the world to it, even if it stops the plot dead. I point you to the musical sequence in Shape of Water, which is lovely in a vacuum, but at that point in the movie, we're kind of ramping things up. While we're stopping, like, for pacing purposes, it's really indulgent. Pacific Rim is like that. The first Pacific Rim was just shoving all these big ideas together, and it's just people nerding out over their own fun ideas. And I think there's something really charming about that.
The first film is also so eager to get to the next fun idea that it doesn't explore the one that it just introduced.
Exactly. Which, again, why I was looking forward to a sequel.
Yeah.
Because we can explore. So, in the sequel, Charlie Hunnam's character, Raleigh, is gone. They never say he's dead, but they also never say where he is, and it feels like they're kind of hedging their bets on that. I interviewed...
In case there's another Pacific Rim, they can bring him back.
I remember when they, if you remember, the G.I. Joe Retaliation sequel, which also had to do an entirely new cast of characters, or mostly new cast of characters, killed off a bunch of the characters in the original film. One character who pointedly did not show up at all was Scarlet, who is a fan favorite character from the comics and from the
cartoon show.
From the cartoon show. And we've interviewed John Chu a bunch of times. And we asked him about that, or I did. I don't remember which interview it was. And he was just like, yeah, well, we didn't want to kill her off. She'd be around for later. So I guess they're kind of hedging their bets and maybe they can bring him back at some point. But whatever, he's gone.
Well, it doesn't matter. He's not why people went to go see Pacific Rim.
But he was the protagonist, and so it's kind of weird to drop him entirely. Because he's not the protagonist in the same way that Myers was the protagonist in Hellboy.
And they dropped him for Hellboy, too.
But in Hellboy, he had nothing. Yeah. He was literally just there to have things explained to them. Raleigh was, to be fair, an emotional character who actually had a narrative he was going through. So he was a real character. Regardless, he's gone. Right. The new protagonist is played by John Boyega of Star Wars fame and Attack the Block fame. He plays the never-before-mentioned son of Idris Elba's character from the original movie. Idris Elba spent the entire movie talking about fatherhood with his adopted daughter and just sort of forgot to mention he had a son and she had a brother. Just sort of never came up.
But
it was never relevant. When he was dying and giving like a speech to his daughter to tell him to move on, at no point did he just say, by the way, tell your brother I said hi. Nothing. They're doing the best they can to make the protagonist of this film have a distinct connection, which is, again, why wasn't it Mako Mori, but I digress. So, John Boyega's character has been sort of living in this
The monster
war.
The monster war ended about a decade ago, and now he is just trying to make ends meet in the ruins of the coastal cities that were destroyed by monsters.
Yeah, Earth has been rebuilding itself, but we're still in a kind of
it's kind of like
road
the Third
warrior
Man kind of thing.
I think Third Man's a good example of this, where just there's everything's kind of in shambles, and there's a lot of black marketeering out there, and so he is like stealing cars to trade for sriracha sauce. Yeah. Just like the whole market's weird.
And he gets a whole case of sriracha for a car.
That's a good deal for it. That's a lot of sriracha.
Good trade.
But at the beginning of the movie, he is breaking into an old rundown Jaeger factory. Again, Jaegers are the robots, kaijus are the monster. And he's trying to steal a useful battery thingy. And
a widget,
if you will, and someone steals it ahead of him. Someone steals it. She is a young woman whose name is.
I'm looking it up too.
Yeah, because I actually really like her a lot. Hold on, what's her name?
Adria Arjona is.
Yeah, she plays a character. No, is that right?
Or excuse me, Kaylee Spaney.
Yeah. Sorry.
Wrong actress.
We're bad with names. Kaylee Spaney, she plays a character named Amara Namani. She has built her own Jaeger out of spare parts, and unlike the giant Jaegers, which need two pilots, hers is small enough that she can pilot it by herself.
Okay. So what we have here is a plot element that streamlines everything.
Yes, it does.
You don't need the psychic connection.
As long as they're smaller, you don't need the psychic connection.
If it's a little, and I understand that the monsters are supposed to be enormous.
Yeah.
thousands of times the size of even that little robot.
Yeah.
But imagine just like single pilots on a bunch of little tiny robots, and they're all working together, and they're all like sort of cute and scrappy. They even call the robot scrappers.
The Jaeger is called Scrapper. So they get this,
and it like can roll into a ball and avoid anything. And survive anything, and it's cool, and then they don't use it.
So civilians are not allowed to have Jaegers, and another Jaeger pilot, an official Jaeger pilot, shows up to arrest them, and then they jump into her Jaeger, and they actually manage to put up a fight against like the pride of the Jaeger fleet, and so he's in trouble. Mako Moria's sister says, I can get you out of jail if you agree to come back to the program which you abandoned, maverick renegade.
And train the cadets.
Yeah, and then Amara Namani gets signed on as a cadet because she obviously has a bunch of talent.
This sounds
that's fun.
This sounds like the fourth film in a series. Like all the old cast is just gone, and now we have to sort of introduce a new cast of cadets. That's fine. I like that premise.
I actually like the opening of the movie quite a bit. There's like some awkward exposition right at the front, but like once you get going, John Boyega is a charming actor, and I really like him in this not give a fuck mode. There's like a scene where he's in the Shatterdome, and he just couldn't care less. He's wearing his bathrobe to official things. He's like making elaborate ice cream sundaes. I love don't give a fuck John Boyega. Like he's great. And honestly, that whole opening action sequence with Scrapper versus whatever the other Jaeger was.
Gigantic blue Jaeger thing, yeah.
That's a fun action sequence.
Well, in fact, all of the robot action in this is way better than in the first film. One of my big complaints, in fact, maybe my biggest complaint about Pacific Rim was that Guillermo del Toro, he likes, to add a lot of more visual texture than a shot may need. So he likes to decorate up the walls, and and a lot of people appreciate that sort of visual busyness. But when you're having a robot fight, an actual action sequence, first of all, don't submerge them knee-deep in water. Second of all, don't shoot it at night. Third of all, don't shoot it in the rain. Fourth of all, don't make us put on 3D glasses in addition to that, so I can't see any damn thing. The screen may as well have been black.
And he did all of those things together.
All of those things together in almost every single action sequence.
Okay,
This film, which was made by Stephen E. DeKnight, another person we've interviewed, in fact.
He was on our old podcast. To talk about the first season of Daredevil, and he was cool.
The guy who did Daredevil.
Yeah.
He directed this one. He knows better. He knows maybe the special effects are just better. Maybe he's just wiser about using them. But all of the fight scenes are in clear daylight in open areas where you can actually tell where the monsters are, what the monsters kind of look like, and where they stand in relation to one another, and how the robots are sort of fighting together.
Okay, I have a different take on this than you do. And I'll grant you, I think the original Pacific Rim's fight scenes were too busy to a fault. I'll agree with that. But I appreciated that they weren't just filmed like video game cutscenes, that they were actually filmed with a different eye, a different angle, a different consideration for environment.
Okay.
And I appreciated that. Is it busier than it needed to be? Yeah, but I would have toned it down by like 20% as opposed to all the way back down to video game cutscene, which is where we are here. I like a lot of the choreography of the fights here when a bunch of the Jaegers are fighting together against a bunch of monsters at the end. All of that, like, there's a lot of fun business there with, like, Jaegers, like, jumping around and turrets turning over.
And of course, the cadets are very heavily involved.
Yeah, all of that stuff is, like, that's really, really nicely conceived, but there's a flatness to the presentation that makes it less interesting than it should be. And I think there are bits of it that make perfect sense for it, but after a while, I noticed that kind of every fight scene except for one quick bit in the snow kind of looks like it takes place on the same stock, like, old Godzilla cardboard set. And that kind of bugs me because I feel like that's a little lazy.
That doesn't bug me because I think that's the genre we're dealing in. And I think a lot it's like like an old slasher movie. I think a lot of audiences, and I'm guilty of this too, kind of require, almost demand a certain level of banality. They don't want a huge amount of stretching because it's the tropes that we're going to see done in a new way. And and I understand that makes a genre stale, especially the kaiju genre, which started with Godzilla back in the 1950s. But it's the way you film this sort of thing.
Well, but
because you can't show what it would realistically look like. You can't put too much realism in that. A, because it's a ridiculous fantasy and creatures can't get that big. But if you're knocking over buildings, there's going to be so much smoke and so much chaos, and the creatures wouldn't be able to move through the busyness in a realistic fight, that it wouldn't be interesting to look at. And I think a lot of filmmakers are trying to make that kind of citywide mayhem look really, really realistic, and it looks horrifying. Man of Steel.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those were going off of the sort of post 9/11 mentality, and this one seems to be an actual post 9/11 where you can knock over a building and it isn't a tragedy.
Yeah, you can knock over 800. You can use a gravity beam to pull a building onto a monster's head, and that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah, and your mileage might vary on that, but that's the movie's attitude.
And the clarity of those fight scenes did give me a bit of like an 8-year-old boy kind of rush. You know, seeing an old Godzilla film on TV when I was a kid.
I'm fine with that, but I think the difference for me is, again, you're working with a certain banality, a certain expectation. You expect Jason Voorhees to spend the entire film killing teenagers. Okay, fine. I don't want the same kill over and over again in the same environment. If I saw a Friday the 13th movie and everyone died in the same cabin, kind of the same way, that's a boring Jason Voorhees movie. It's your responsibility to find ways to tweak it. There are certain things that they do tweak. I think that opening fight between a small Jaeger and a large Jaeger, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different variations of the kaiju monsters, but by the time we just have Jaegers versus kaiju, it's actually kind of kaijus we've seen before, and they're not that exciting and interesting. I just think that Godzilla fought different types of monsters every time, and that's what made it distinct.
I know it's not very good form to quote other reviewers, but Dave White made an excellent point when the first Pacific Rim came out, and he's a big fan of old Godzilla movies as well. And he pointed out that in all the old Godzilla movies, there's a moment when the monster lurches up out of the ocean or lands from space, and it stands on the coast looking out over the city, and there's always going to be a brief moment, like a glory shot of the monster, where it just sort of looks around trying to choose, which of these things do I eat first? And it's a brief moment, but it's very vital because it lets us know the monster a little bit.
Yeah.
And the first Pacific Rim really didn't do this, and this one does it still not enough.
Really doesn't do it.
Where we kind of get to know the monster. We should know what they should be saying the name of the monster over and over and over again. Oh no, Hedorah is attacking the power station. Yeah. Oh no, Hedorah is climbing up Hedorah is coming from Hedorah is on my leg. You need to say it over and over again.
In Pacific
so
Rim,
we know what that creature is.
In Pacific Rim, naming each monster, like the original one, was like kind of like ritualistic.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, we have named this one Diamond Head or something like that. There was an announcement. Here it's like, and that one's that one, I don't care.
They like rattle them off quickly in one scene, and I missed it. It's like I couldn't name those monsters.
We're focusing on the action because that's kind of all this movie is. If you look at the plot of it, it's about there is a Chinese company that has come up with a way to sort of have drone pilot Jaegers, which actually makes a lot of sense. And even Mako Mori, who's in charge of the original Jaeger program, says, I have issues with the security of that because those could potentially be hacked or something. Like that's a problem. But if it works, that's great. That's a great idea. I hope it works. I just can't trust it yet.
The pilots can just, if one Jaeger gets destroyed, the pilot can just take control of another Jaeger somewhere by remote.
Well, and also the idea that, they don't have to actually transport the Jaegers anywhere. They can have Jaegers everywhere and just get into the closest one.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's actually a valid place to take
you don't have to train thousands and thousands of pilots.
As an idea for a Pacific Rim sequel, that's not bad, actually. You thought that through a little bit. Problem is, there's a lot of things they didn't think through really, really well, and that's really frustrating. All of, like, the young cadets, I like the young actors, but almost none of them get anything resembling real screen time.
Yeah.
So I don't get spend a lot of time with them. All the characters I previously knew get very little screen time, except for the two scientists, and there's a weird plot that happens with them that is both satisfying and dissatisfying at the same time, but I don't want to get into spoiler territory.
Yeah.
I'm really mad at what happens to Mako Mori.
She's not in it enough.
And then there's a thing that happens to her, and then, like, she sends this important email, like, oh, this email was the most important thing. There's no reason for her to have that information. They never explain why she got that. So, like, she's in this. She was a character who was so interesting that there's like a critical school of thought that uses her as an example of how to write good female characters. And in the sequel, they turn her into a stray plot point. And damn, that pisses me off.
There's a lot of stray plot. So what we're talking about is a loose plot about robots fighting monsters in the future and a young crew of cadets.
Yeah.
need to take over the robot army to take on monsters.
Fun!
This needs to run right after Bionic 6.
Bionic 6.
Like, on TV in animated form in 1987.
Great idea.
That's one way it works.
Voltron Jr., I'm down.
The other way, you slash the budget by 90%, you give it to Stuart Gordon, and you have him call it Robot Jocks 4, whatever one they're up to now.
It's only one Robot Jocks, but they reused a lot of the same VFX for different movies.
Yeah. So
they're huge fans of Robot Jocks. If you want giant robot fights,
Robot Jocks is still kind of where it's at.
Kind of the gold standard.
Yeah. And that movie had a tiny budget, and they did a lot with it.
Yeah, and the plot still kind of sucks, but the robot fights are great.
And it's set in an interesting world that they give us just enough to make titillating. It has some interesting characters, and the robot effects are really interesting in Robot Jocks. That's what you need with something like Pacific Rim. Trim it all down. Mythology is not what's bringing us to these movies.
Yeah, and by jettisoning almost all the old characters and introducing all these new characters, but still making the main focus plot instead of their character development, because there's like a Top Gun version of this that I really want to see. That's more about their character. More about like what goes into their journeys and like stripping them down, making sure they become part of a team. They give lip service to that. But there's like, I want to see like something that's more about the training and more about that. Then the fights will have more of an impact. It's just this kind of... It's a messy movie. I didn't not enjoy watching it though. Like it's as a silly matinee about monsters fighting robots. There's enough monsters fighting robots, and there's enough cool moments there that I ultimately dug it, and I think it's worth a matinee or like a rental or something like that. But for all of its many flaws, Pacific Rim had weight to it. Like it had gravitas. Like it actually felt like a significant blockbuster in some way. Like it's actually pretty impressive that they put this thing together. And this feels like a bit of a tacky sequel with some really good bits.
And I like it if you can make something really realistic and really get me feel for the characters, and you really make it character driven and also have some good action in it.
Yeah,
it's really tough to do. Yep. But if you can do that, I will appreciate it. But if you have material that's clearly inspired by Saturday morning cartoons, we interviewed the screenwriter for this one.
Travis Beacham. The original. The original.
We did a whole commentary track with Travis Beacham
because he didn't have a commentary track on the DVD, and we're like, dude, what the fuck?
So we recorded one. We got him, and we got one together.
Full of interesting tidbits about like storylines they were going to do for the sequel that they ended up not using because they got different screenwriters.
Travis Beacham is a little younger than us. He's clearly inspired by the Saturday morning cartoons. This is a Saturday morning cartoon. The tackiness is a good step, I would say. Getting rid of all that gravitas is a positive change. It's not tacky enough yet. I think if they do go full-on straight-to-video tackiness, you might actually have the best film in the series.
Maybe. Well, we will see if it continues. I think it might be eaten alive by Black Panther again, but we'll find out.
Black Panther is unstoppable. Ready Player One might unseat it.
The other big sequel opening this week is, of course, Sherlock Gnomes. And there's a connection here between Pacific Rim and Sherlock Gnomes beyond the fact that they're both sequels. And I just want to take a quick moment because this isn't important, but it's something I think we need to put a stop to.
Okay.
Almost every movie I saw this week had a character at a moment of some drama or suspenseful significance turn to another character and say, "Let's do this."
Oh, you're just now noticing this?
Oh, no. I'm not saying I haven't. I'm just noticing it. What I'm saying is I've
been rolling my eyes at that for 5 years.
My thing is when you see like 5 movies in a week and they all do it multiple times, that line of dialogue is dead. It's dead. It means nothing. It's stupid.
It's this generation's "let's get out of here." There was a poll in like maybe the early 90s about like what the most common line of dialogue is, and "let's get out of here" was often heard in feature films, and they stopped using it when people noticed that. People have noticed "let's do that." They use that in TV commercials. It's in
trailers,
kid
and everything.
films and action films.
And it's a boring line of dialogue. It's a moment. It's always used at a dramatic moment where you're about to do something really cool.
Yeah.
There are so many better ways to say that. When Shakespeare had a "let's do this" moment, he said, "Cry havoc and let's slip the dogs of war." That's a "let's do this."
Well, that wasn't a "let's do this" moment, though.
You know what I mean.
It's a good "let's do this" line.
I'm going to throw this out there. I was thinking of Star Trek 6.
Okay. The way it was used in Star Trek 6... It's a let's do this line.
Okay.
The way it was used in Julius Caesar, however.
I apologize. I was being cute. But you're right. You're right to correct me. Thank you. My point is that that's your moment to say something super badass that people will quote forever, and you fall back on let's do this. Screenwriters, if you find yourself writing let's do this more than once in a screenplay, rewrite those lines. If you find yourself doing it once in a screenplay, rewrite that line. But 2 is unforgivable.
I'm going to go further. If you write it down, you have to punish yourself by tearing up that whole screenplay and starting from the start because you led yourself to that moment.
You have to do an entire screenplay now without the words let's do or this. Any of them. I digress. Let's do this also appears in Sherlock Gnomes. Now, I have a weird relationship with Sherlock Gnomes because of a little Twitter experiment I did about a year ago.
I remember this experiment.
Those who follow me on Twitter may remember this. Most people haven't seemed to have noticed that I stopped doing it 6 months ago, but okay. That about a year ago, I noticed that people were doing these weird countdowns to things. It's like only 100
to the release of your favorite movie.
Yeah, only 100
holiday,
only 100 days until the release of Rogue One or whatever. And it occurred to me that
Rogue One.
It was a Star Wars movie. People were excited about it, but it occurred to me that people use that kind of mentality partially because they're excited about something. I'm not trying to pretend they don't, but also partially as sort of a marketing tool for themselves, because we're part of this anticipation matrix that we're all a part of. The anticipation for a movie is often more lucrative than the movie itself for people who write about it anyway. We talked about search engine optimization and SEO and clickbait headlines. What is going to be in the next Star Wars? How is Infinity War going to end? We don't know. Those aren't articles yet.
People use phrases like SEO and clickbait, even if they're not professionals. Yeah, not even if they're amateurs, if they're just readers. People know what that stuff is now. James Rocky, the now retired film critic, coined the phrase the anticipation industrial complex.
That's a better term.
And that was one of the things that sort of drove him away from writing about the industry. It was all about what's coming up, but not just about what's coming up and not talking about news as it came out, but posting something about an upcoming film every single day because they knew a lot of people were excited about it, and keeping everybody in this steady state of marketing frenzy for months on end until the film comes out.
About a movie, again, you don't know if it's
about
good
a movie
or
that
not.
you haven't seen yet.
You don't know if it's good or not. You don't know if it's worth it or not. And if people don't like it very much, they're really going to turn on you afterwards. It really, really sucks.
Well,
and I was looking
to be
at
fair,
this.
when you see the movie, people are going to be so high still from that month-long period that they'll see it and they'll say, that is it was everything I wanted it to be. The marketing was not wrong.
And then 10 years later, we realized that the Phantom Menace had some problems.
Yeah, it takes a long time for that to die down.
Exactly. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to do an experiment, and I wanted to see, because we only do that with certain movies.
Yeah.
And I was like, what if we acknowledge that maybe it's not the movie that's anticipating things. Maybe we can generate the anticipation by treating other movies like Star Wars or Marvel Cinematic Universe or Batman. And I thought this, okay, what if I take the dumbest sounding movie that's coming out in a while, like not next week, like in a while.
Like in a year.
Like in a year. And I do a countdown just to see if I can get people excited about something that they do not give a shit about. And I picked Sherlock Gnomes because it had the funniest title. And it was a sequel to a movie that did okay, but people don't remember or quote or care about. So it's a stupid sounding thing. So I just started doing a series of tweets. 200 days to Sherlock Gnomes, 199 days to Sherlock Gnomes, 198 days to Sherlock Gnomes, etc., etc., etc. And I did it for a little while, just thinking it was kind of funny. I eventually got kind of tired of it, so I stopped. But now that Sherlock Gnomes is out, I have people coming back to me on social media saying, "Are you excited?" I'm like, no.
No, I was never excited.
The whole point was that's not something we should be excited about, but that's the kind of, we have that power. We kind of forget sometimes that as entertainment writers, podcasters, video stars, whatever, that we do have some influence, and it all is kind of how we treat things.
Yeah.
So, granted,
when we're sarcastic, it doesn't always read.
Well, but I think it was an interesting experiment. I think I kind of proved my point that there are some people who have said, I am almost excited to see Sherlock Gnomes because you did a countdown for it.
Had this fun little sarcastic joke about it.
So
it gets them genuinely excited.
So I'm going to continue this. I'm going to start today, the day we recorded this, I'm doing a countdown to the Nutcracker and the Four Realms.
Oh, another terrible looking movie.
Yeah, just to see if I can get people stoked. I'm going to commit to it this time. I'm going to do it the whole way through.
That's got like a lot of Disney money behind it.
No one gives a shit.
No, it looks,
no one cares.
And I've seen a preview and it looks awful.
No one cares.
Awful,
like no one's like excited. Like woo!
I can't wait for
Gibbs.
Tchaikovsky finally getting his due.
It's no one's most anticipated movie of the year. Is my point. So I think that'd be it has the dumbest title I can see in the near future. I digress. So Sherlock Gnomes. Yeah. Sherlock Gnomes is out, and I gotta tell you, I'm not a fan of the series. So I'm not like people are like, oh, what's his review gonna be like? It's just another fucking movie. Romeo and Juliet was a movie that came out like 5 years ago, something like that.
2011 it came out. Almost 7 years ago.
Yeah, well, shit. So the entire target demo is too old for it now.
They're taking their kids. If they were old enough when they saw Sherlock Gnomes,
that doesn't make any sense.
No, they would have to have been already in college.
If you don't recall Romeo and Juliet, good for you. But here, it's just this kind of bland and inoffensive retelling of Romeo and Juliet, but from the perspective of terracotta garden gnomes who, like the toys in Toy Story, come to life whenever humans aren't around.
But when humans are in the room, they don't choose to freeze. They kind of have to freeze.
Yeah. Which must be
like forced
really,
to being and when
they really annoying.
And when they fall asleep, they freeze in their upright positions with their eyes open.
It doesn't. They didn't think out the premise very well. Can we just admit that? So it was just obviously they changed the ending, but because not everyone dies and it's not fucking sad. But like it's just
she stabs herself and just shatters the terracotta.
But like that's it. That's the movie. It's not much to it really. Who cares? 7 years go by and they decide to make a sequel called Sherlock Gnomes, and the whole idea is how they apparently perceive this franchise is a whole bunch of different literary adaptations from the perspective of garden gnomes. And like one of the things that like this it opens with, like the first film, a gnome saying, we're going to tell you the story now. First one was Romeo and Juliet. Now we're going to do it. And a bunch of gnomes come in like, ooh, Spider-Man gnome coming. Like a whole bunch of pun titles.
That's not a
book.
Literary classic, but
like you want like 100 years of gnomitude. Yeah. Or To Kill a Gnoming Bird, or Madame Gnomery.
You have no idea how much I would love to see 100 Years of Solitude with like nothing but terracotta gnomes.
Doesn't that sound fascinating? But they chose Sherlock Gnomes because that's fun.
Gnomelita? No, that's terrible.
That's a terrible idea. We're not doing that. You monster. Anyway.
It is a great novel. I'll say that much.
Moving on. Okay.
Moving on to Sherlock Gnomes.
Anyway, they chose Sherlock Gnomes. And yeah, it's about a garden gnome who's Sherlock Gnomes. He defends gnomes from a pie mascot named Moriarty.
Moriarty is a pie mascot, and Moriarty is like rubbery. Whereas Sherlock Gnomes is also a terracotta gnome. He looks like Sherlock Holmes. The only thing that's vaguely gnomish about him is he has like a little fold in his deerstalker.
Yeah,
like most gnomes have those little folded knit caps.
Yeah, it's kind of it's kind of thin.
He and Dr. Gnome Watson are working together.
Watson is played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who, again, a lot of the voice cast of this really should be doing better stuff. I realized they were free that weekend.
Yeah.
And, like, they just needed the check or they wanted something they could show their kids. But, like, you got Chiwetel Ejiofor, you got Michael Caine.
Well, Michael Caine, I think they just reused, like, recording from the previous movie.
No,
he had, like, 3 or 4 lines.
But they still got him. Like, Emily Blunt and James McAvoy star in this, and you can tell that
they came back.
They came back, but you can tell this probably isn't, like, their favorite thing in the world to do. A bunch of gnomes are being stolen, and it sends Sherlock Gnomes and Romeo and Juliet, who are back for some reason. Like, I don't think you needed them. I don't think anyone's going to complain if we just had a Sherlock Gnomes adventure. Like, we need to bring in Romeo and Juliet. So, like, in the future, like, when they do, like, Waiting for Gnome Doe, like, it's going to be...
waiting for Gnome.
Gnome.
There you go.
Gnome named Gnorm. They're going to be... It's just going to be, like, Sherlock and Juliet and Romeo sitting on the bench. You have to keep reusing... Stop reusing the characters. It makes no sense. So Romeo and Juliet and Sherlock Gnomes are running around London solving mysteries.
Yeah, following clues that are left behind by Moriarty, and they think Moriarty is dead, and where is he? But he keeps getting these clues. There's a few jokes where they skirt toward sort of the very nature of what a garden gnome is, and that is like a really tacky thing that only decorate really tacky-looking lawns.
Generally.
I wish there had been more flamingos involved, but
there was a flamingo in the first one. I don't know where it went.
Yeah, there's a deer played by Ozzy Osbourne, strangely enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do kind of acknowledge that this is a world of tacky, chintzy tchotchkes.
Chintzy tchotchke sounds like a movie I'd want to see.
Chintzy tchotchkes. They communicate. This is the only thing that lives in this world. So they go into like they go to Chinatown and go to like an Asian tchotchke shop, and there's a bunch of those little luck cats that kind of charge around and meow at each other. That's a little cute, I guess.
It's a little cute. It's a little stereotypy. It's not a great scene. It's also completely superfluous.
Yeah.
I think Mary J. Blige is in it.
Mary J. Blige plays a doll who sings a song, and
she plays Irene Adler. She plays like Sherlock Holmes, like classic, like love interest, who's like his only intellectual match, and that's kind of fun.
Who's the police inspector? He's also in it. The Sherlock Holmes police inspector. I forgot the character's name.
I forget it.
The cop that frequently showed up in Sherlock Holmes stories. There's an analog to that. The detective.
Is it Lestrade?
I totally forgot.
I think it's Lestrade. Anyway, but yeah, there's some bits. There's like they get stuck in like some sort of shipping container, and the container is marked Moffat Gaddis, which are the guys who did the new Sherlock Holmes reboot on BBC everyone likes so much. There's a bunch of cute little.
There's a hound belonging to a man named Baskerville. Those are all cute, but
they're all droll.
This is not a film that is loaded with a lot of really intellectual jokes. In fact, it's really broad slapstick of not a low form, just of a really bland form.
That's my thing. Is that this movie and Romeo and Juliet? They're just kind of pablum. They're just kind of toast. It's not really interesting to consume.
Sherlock Gnomes, Romeo and Juliet. Sherlock Gnomes is the middle of the road that people frequently talk about.
This is mediocrity.
This is what we compare it to. Yeah, this is baseline mediocrity. It's what we refer to if we say something's below average. This is the average. When something's pretty good, this is what it could be if it wasn't pretty good.
Yeah, like they put some effort into it, but no one was really trying too hard.
Which means, there's not a lot of wit, humor, or color. There's not a lot of creativity, but there's also not a lot that's offensive or horrible. Yeah. Which is great because they cut out a lot of really horrible gags out of the preview. Like they get.
I didn't even see the preview.
I saw the preview like 100 times. I don't know why it was stalking me. Like every time I went to see a movie, I saw the preview for Sherlock Gnomes. It doesn't matter what the movie was. Annihilation. Okay. Sherlock Gnomes. So there was a gag where there's a character that they call Mankini. It's like a half-naked gnome in a little skimpy outfit. He played really heavily in the preview.
Not really in the movie.
And indeed, there's a line of dialogue that Johnny Depp clearly recorded where he's talking about how you're not shaking your tail like a squirrel enough. And then he says, Mankini, would you demonstrate? And then there's a scene of Mankini shaking his booty.
Which is weird because in the scene where he says that, Mankini is literally in a different part of the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like they probably only recorded that for the trailer.
Only for the trailer, and that's not in the movie, and thank goodness.
Yeah,
because there's a bit where Mankini jumps into a mud bog and begins breaking wind and says, "Hey, I'm making a jacuzzi." That's not in the movie.
Thank God. There's only two things. Okay, there's two things. Oh, there's three things. There's three things that I think are semi-interesting about Sherlock Gnomes.
Okay.
The first one is there are a couple of scenes where Sherlock goes into what fans of the Sherlock Gnomes stories and shows and some of the movies.
Holmes stories.
Yeah. He goes into his mind palace. Now, if you're not familiar with that, if you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes, a mind palace is a mental technique. And they actually talk about this in like the Hannibal Lecter novels as well. Hannibal does this.
The movie Dreamcatcher does it.
Yeah, where it's a way of organizing your memories so that you can sort of literalize them, and you can walk around inside your mind and find that memory. And it's a way of organizing all of your thoughts. And some people can do it in an incredibly elaborate way and have incredibly extensive libraries of memories and facts and so on and so forth. When Sherlock Gnomes does this, the whole art style changes. It goes to 2D, goes to black and white, and all of a sudden it's more vibrant and buoyant and interesting. Like those little bits in and of themselves are fun bits of animation. And I appreciate that they put some effort into it.
And it makes you miss 2D animation.
Yes.
Something like this would have probably looked a lot better in 2D. Because they would have had to put more thought into just the scenarios and the way the shots were set up. And I understand, that they do that in CGI, but, since animation takes so long, they really have to ruminate a lot more. And the pacing feels a lot better. It's not less frantic as a result. Modern CGI animated films are way too fast. They just tell 800 jokes at once, hoping that we'll just sort of chuckle along the way.
Yeah, they're not trying to make an immersive world. They're just trying to dangle keys in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's frustrating. The other thing that I thought was interesting but not good, there's a scene towards the beginning where they're trying to establish that all these gnomes are being taken, and they don't really have a mechanism for that. There's no character who could know all that. So they cut to a news report. And they talk about how this big fireworks display, which might be important later, is going on later tonight. But in the meantime, and that's barely news, a whole bunch of garden gnomes have gone missing around the local areas. And then it ends with, this looks like a job for Sherlock Gnomes. And I'm like, you don't know he exists.
I'm guessing it was a pun, like a cute joke made by the news announcer, and he didn't know that there actually was a being in the world
that
named
did
Sherlock
not come
Gnomes.
across at all. Okay, if that's the case, that's almost funny, but it did not come across at all. And I will say this: I think there's a couple of vocal performances in here that are pretty good. I think Chiwetel Ejiofor actually brings a little dramatic heft,
a little bit,
to his long-suffering sidekick character. I would actually love to see Chiwetel Ejiofor in a legitimate Sherlock Holmes movie. He'd be great as literally any character. Holmes, Watson, Moriarty, Holmes' smarter older brother, Irene Adler. I don't care any of them.
Chiwetel Ejiofor is such a great actor.
Such a great actor. I love him in everything.
I want to see him and Harry Lennox. Those are two actors I noticed about the same time that are both great.
So great.
I want to see him play off. I don't know why those two, but I think they play off each other well.
Give him a series. Give him a season of True Detective.
Harry Lennox is really angry, and Chiwetel Ejiofor is really kind of gentle.
Okay.
They'd make a good team.
They're in The Odd Couple.
Perfect.
Make The Odd Couple with Harry Lennox and Chiwetel Ejiofor. Oh my God, it's great.
Harry Lennox would be like a murderous Oscar.
Yes, he would totally be Oscar. We all know he'd be Oscar.
He'd be Oscar.
Yeah, I love it. I love every single thing about it. Let's move on.
One last note.
Sure.
And this is a tradition that came over from the first film. But all of the music in Sherlock Gnomes is Elton John hits.
Yeah.
Not original Elton John songs that are sung diegetically by the characters, but just background soundtrack choices that are all Elton John songs.
They'll take a riff from an Elton John #1 single and they'll put it in the score for a chase scene, even though it has nothing to do with that context.
Why are we listening to Crocodile Rock at this point?
I
don't know.
It was pretty thin. It was really thin in Romeo and Juliet, but now it has nothing to do with anything.
It really screams of, well, we had the rights. We paid for the songs. We're going to use them.
I would love it if they changed it and they had a different British artist every single time, Sherlock Gnomes featuring music by Velvet Underground. I'm like, whoa, that's interesting.
Well, what classic novel would warrant a Velvet Underground soundtrack? Gnome
Air.
Germinal, but with nominal.
Gnomering Heights. Wuthering Gnomes?
Well, I take Wuthering Gnomes first.
Okay, Wuthering Gnomes. Moving on.
The House of the Seven Gnomels.
There's a couple of celebrated art house filmmakers who have films coming out this weekend. One of them is Steven Soderbergh, the guy who says he's going to retire and never does.
He said he was going to retire, and then he made a dozen more movies.
And his latest is a film shot entirely on an iPhone, which...
And he's been doing a lot of digital experimentation.
For years now.
For many years. He was one of the early adopters.
Yeah. So this is a sort of Hitchcockian kind of thriller. It stars Claire Foy as a woman who has just moved to a new town. She moved to get away from a stalker, and she's still dealing with a lot of PTSD, and it's coming out in really awkward ways, and she keeps seeing her stalker around. So she goes to a mental health clinic to just have a session. She's trying to take care of her mental health. Good for her. And in the course of the session, she says that the therapist asks, have you thought about self-harm? And she says that she has. And when the therapist asked, have you thought about how you do it, which is sort of the next step of this is a real problem, we need to address this, she admits that she has. And so this woman gives her some paperwork. Claire Foy just sort of writes it, fills it out without thinking about it, turns it in, and doesn't realize that she has just been committed.
She committed herself.
And because she is committing herself, because she's potentially a danger to herself and others, she can't uncommit herself. She is there for the duration of her stay.
Which at first is 24 hours.
Yes, but because she panics because they didn't tell her what was going on, and they made her feel trapped and vulnerable like any normal person would in that situation where your freedom is suddenly being taken away and no one is talking to you about it. No one's even explaining it. So they said, well, you were aggressive, so we're going to keep you here for a week. And then the potential is they can keep her for as long as the insurance money will hold out. And then they'll say she's fine, and it turns out it's part of an elaborate insurance scam. That in and of itself is terrifying. That's a terrifying thought. That's a terrifying situation to be in.
Here's the terrifying thing about this scenario. And it plays into something that is a legitimate fear of mine. You can't prove that you're not crazy.
Yes.
Whatever it is, like if you're calm and judicious, you sound like you learned the language.
Yeah.
If you panic and cuss, you sound like you're mad.
Yep.
There was a really great This American Life story about a guy who tried to get a stint in a mental institution instead of going to prison. He had committed a crime. He figured, well, if I kind of like fake insanity, if I get my lawyer to say I was out of my mind at the time, I can go to a mental health institution. That'll be easier than prison, right? And it turns out it was just this situation. Since you can't prove that you're sane, he was just stuck in the mental institution pretty much for the rest of his life.
It's part of the plot of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as well.
And he calls in This American Life. This American Life goes in and interviews this guy. He's calm, he's judicious, he explains everything really cleanly. But to a doctor, that could sound like obfuscation if you're looking for it. Yeah. So,
it legitimately terrifies me, like the idea of that.
There's a wonderful period of Unsane after she's been committed. But
by wonderful, we mean horrifying.
No, I mean just in terms of cinematic virtuosity. A really scary sequence where she's in this hospital and the doctors begin telling her, but you've been talking about this stalker. She still sees her stalker, and we begin to get a wonderful bit of ambiguity as to what her actual mental state is.
Because the thing
is all of that previous prologue where she's recovering from PTSD, was all that a fantasy that she concocted to make sense of her of seeing her stalker in a mental institution? Is she mad? And what is the actual truth here? And that is an ambiguity that they could have stretched all the way to the end of the film. And it would have been great.
Yeah, and without telling you what happens,
they give us pretty concrete answers pretty early on.
I'd say about halfway through. They milk it for a bit. And
a bit, but I wish they had milked it longer because it's that ambiguity that made this film fascinating.
I think that's the root of it, but what I actually really like about Unsane is the way that the story kind of transforms. It starts out as a woman who is being institutionalized against her will. She's being manipulated by a system, and that in and of itself is scary. Then as she is inside the clinic and she starts seeing a guy who looks suspiciously like her stalker, but we've seen her overreact in a scenario like that before, and it wasn't really the guy.
Yeah.
So now she looks really, really crazy. And now there is that ambiguity, and that's really, really scary. And then as the story goes on, it turns into a different thing, and then it turns into a different thing. And I think on some level, on some almost pulpy, early Samuel Fuller film kind of level, it's
specifically Shock Corridor.
Specifically Shock Corridor, but like it's just keeping this thing really tight and wrenching, and it never gets boring. It never, even though it's really small and intimate. And I think shooting it on an iPhone partly is a gimmick to see if you can do it, but I think also gives it kind of this, almost like this found footage quality without having the distracting gimmick of found footage, because we understand that this is, if a movie looks like this, it was homemade.
Yeah.
That it was sort of surreptitious. In fact, there's a character who actually has snuck a cell phone into the clinic, and it's a sort of thing that you probably would have filmed on the sly when no one was looking, and then you'd see it on 60 Minutes someday. So, like, it's got that aesthetic quality, and I think that's really, really great. I think Claire Foy gives a really incredible performance in this.
Yeah.
She's got to play so many different aspects of it. She's got to be super brave, super capable, but also vulnerable enough that this could happen to her in the first place. And she has to make some really shocking choices by the end of the movie in order to hopefully survive this ordeal. And it's incredible how she plays it.
Specifically, it's particularly difficult for her because we mentioned there's this moment where the ambiguity falls away and we realize what we're looking at. And she has to remain resolute in the character that she is from that point on without seeming like that ambiguity is still there.
Yeah.
And she's able to play it that strong. And I think
it's a tough role.
That's a really, really great performance aspect of her performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, you compared it to Hitchcock, and I think I think that's more apt than Samuel Fuller. Samuel Fuller was a little bit more lurid. He had a lot more sort of sensationalistic elements, specifically in Chalk Corridor.
I think Soderbergh is sort of sensationalistic in how he is trying to be topical.
Trying to be topical,
I think he's
but
turning some
there's
topical ideas
more
about believing women when they say something horrible has happened, about the failing mental health system, about sort of what happens when we commoditize healthcare and how that leads to horrific exploitation. He is taking that and making a lurid psychological thriller about it.
I think he's really good, however, about taking the lurid aspects out of it. There's not any sort of like salaciousness to it. There's not,
it's not fun.
It comes from a long tradition of women in prison films that has a lot of salaciousness in its history. So he's really good about jettisoning all feelings of that, and it becomes a lot more terse and a lot more like a Hitchcock thriller, where it's about the mental state of somebody we're rooting for in a really desperate situation that they don't deserve to be in. And that's as gentle as I can put it without giving anything away.
Sure.
I did like it a lot, and it is really taut, and I do like all of the performances in it. But yeah, there's a lot more complexity and psychology that the film hinted at that it kind of gave up on early on, and I wish it had sort of stuck with that a little bit more.
I would never call it a masterpiece, but as an intelligent, and again, I think very unsettling. If you have any anxieties or hangouts about any of the topics we've described, I think it'll hit you.
Yeah,
it hit me. I was really creeped out.
You'll be scratching into your face in some scenes.
The other
and Juno Temple's in it, and I like seeing Juno Temple in anything.
She's always good. The other major art house director with a movie in theaters this weekend is in a limited release. It expands later. Is Isle of Dogs.
It's a Wes Anderson joint.
Yeah, Wes Anderson. One of the most particular directors we've got. His movies don't look like anyone else's movies. And his latest film is another stop-motion animated adventure, much like his best film, Fantastic Mr. Fox, about a near future in which a mayor in a city in Japan has decided to scapegoat all the dogs. And
because he belongs to an anti-dog dynasty.
Yes, and they have decided they're going to exile all the dogs to this trash island, and that's their plan. They don't really have, they're going to, replace them with, robot dogs, but, it's really just kind of, they just hate dogs.
They just hate dogs, and they're all diseased. They have dog flu.
Yeah.
And so they're all covered with, sores, and they have running noses, and they're living on an island of filth. This is a Terry Gilliam setup. Wes Anderson has always been notoriously clean, especially if you look at something like the Grand Budapest Hotel, where not only does he deal with really symmetrical shooting style, but everything is really square. Everybody wears uniforms. They brush themselves off in the morning. This is a movie that's all about filth. It's as filthy as The Box Trolls. Just everybody lives in grime and dirt, and there's maggots on the meat, and the dogs are all just kind of gross looking in certain scenes.
And yet everything is perfectly symmetrical.
And yet everything is still perfectly symmetrical. Yeah. I think he was kind of pushing himself. That he sets it in Japan is appropriate and problematic.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about both of those things. It's appropriate, and of course the plot of the movie is about a 12-year-old boy named Atari, who is the ward of the mayor, who hijacks a miniature plane and goes to Island of Dogs looking for his dog.
Yeah, and he's the only human who's done that. So this pack of dogs, voiced by actors like Bill Murray, Bob Balaban, Bryan Cranston, Jeff Goldblum, decide to team up with this child and help him find his missing dog Spots.
But the dogs speak English, and the humans all speak Japanese.
If they're Japanese, there's one American character.
And there's one American character.
And a translator.
That's right.
In a political convention.
The Japanese characters aren't subtitled, and they said at the beginning that's just sort of to give this sort of air of verisimilitude to it, trying to make the. And I think they also had the dogs speak English and the humans speak Japanese in a way to just show the language barrier between the animals and the humans.
Yeah, the problem is that in making not just a movie in another country, something that Wes Anderson has struggled with before in Darjeeling Limited, which, it's not super offensive, but it's very clearly the narcissistic white male perspective on another culture.
Yeah.
And that's the characters. I'm not saying that's Wes Anderson, but in creating this really weirdly elaborate construct, it has been argued by a lot of really great film critics like Jen Yamato or Justin Chang from the Los Angeles Times, that whatever positive qualities the movies has, he has kind of taken this homage to something, an intended homage, and created this very othering quality to it, where the actual Japanese characters are set at a distance and they have to be translated through American characters. And also, by the way, we are talking about internment, which is a really particularly Japanese concern in America.
A bit of a bugaboo.
He's really opened a can of worms with this movie.
That there's no subtitles really does keep the Japanese characters at kind of a distance. And I understand that it's from the dog's perspective and they're seeing the characters at kind of a distance. And he is casting Americans as diseased animals, so he's, clearly not thinking very highly, maybe, of the American cast. But yeah, he really does what Sofia Coppola did in
Lost in Translation.
Lost in Translation. I'm not sure if you read Justin Chang's review, but he did say some of the sensitivity gets lost in translation. A lot of people have been reconsidering that film in recent years. Inku Kang wrote a really great piece on Lost in Translation and its insensitivity and how Americans go to Japan or other Asian countries and depict them as these kind of wild, exotic places when really it's just their lives.
Yeah.
I'm not as offended by something like Lost in Translation as I am by, like, The Last Samurai or something really or even Kubo and the Two Strings, which tries to make this American myth into a Japanese-sounding myth.
Yeah, there is some real issues with
most certainly to use your word, an othering going on of sort of pushing those Japanese characters away.
And it's super duper frustrating because I think this movie, like Kubo and the Two Strings, another stop-motion animated adventure about a child going on an adventure with animals, they're well-made movies. Well, there's a lot to really like about them, but we have to have this conversation.
This is the most aesthetically ambitious, most strangely peculiar, most difficult to unlock film in Wes Anderson's canon so far, and for that I can deeply admire it, because he's clearly stretching. And to briefly give Wes Anderson the benefit of the doubt, he, I think in his mind, is paying homage to the culture and especially the aesthetics of Japanese culture.
Sure.
There are overhead shots of bento boxes in this film, and what is a Wes Anderson film but a bento box?
An overhead shot.
An overhead shot of a bento box. It is little cordoned off, very neatly arranged, ritualistic films, and I think he looks at a lot of Japanese culture and sees a lot that appeals to his own personal aesthetic. And I think it's almost appropriate that he would eventually come to Japan and set a film in Japan. The problem is he's not making it about Japanese characters. I guess the dogs are Japanese characters, but they're not played by Japanese actors.
Yeah. And
they don't speak Japanese. And so, yeah, there is this problematic cultural reappropriation going on. Again, and I wish it weren't there, because otherwise it's a very fascinating film.
Yeah, when I wrote my print review of this, I really didn't talk about a lot of these issues, and I regret that, but I was still trying to figure out how bad it was. Like, is it just weird? Is it unfortunate? Is it really, 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 really bad? And I was still unpacking a lot of that, and I just kind of focused on the aesthetics and the actual narrative of it, which I think in a vacuum, if you can say such a thing, there's a lot to really, really love about this movie. But the more I think about it, this might be one where my opinion changes over time, because, and again, it's just, he created the construct. He didn't have to tell the story that way. He didn't have to set this in Japan. This could be done anywhere, really. And it's just, when you get the idea of just dogs on an island and a bunch of adventures, he made the choice. There are problems with that choice. Yeah. And I even Justin Chang's review just said he still seems to like the movie, or at least a lot of the movie. This is something we need to have this conversation about.
There's an ugly undercurrent of racial insensitivity. And I think people are... it's not just that Wes Anderson is white. It's that Wes Anderson is white in all capital letters. He is one of the whitest of white directors. His films are aggressively white. His protagonists are all usually men with father issues.
Yeah.
And
there's a great... Screen Junkies had a honest trailers with every Wes Anderson movie.
Oh, just how they're all kind of similar.
And when they lay out just every single very specific trope that's in literally all of his movies, it's hilarious because it's true. And that's not the worst thing in the world. It's okay to have a way you tell stories, but sometimes it doesn't when you apply it in different scenarios, it doesn't quite fit.
And a lot of people have applied this sort of hipsterism appellation to Wes Anderson, which implies that he's not entirely genuine. I don't think you can make films like that without being entirely genuine, but at the same time...
I think this is genuinely how he likes movies.
Yeah. And when he set something like Fantastic Mr. Fox in England, I don't think he's reappropriating British culture, because he's white.
Yeah.
But now he's gone to another culture, I don't think he's dealing with stereotypes, but he is not bothering to make the Japanese characters into something altogether human, which he... Again, his characters are all constructs anyway, but when you
there's a superficiality to all of his characters.
Yeah, all of his characters are intensely devoted to like their outfits and how they look and how they purport themselves.
Wes Anderson's characters are trying to sort of recreate the world in a way that makes more sense to them. A lot of them have very rigid uniforms as opposed to diverse wardrobes, for example.
Yeah.
It's because they want things a certain way and they're trying to impose their perspective on the universe. And I think it's what Wes Anderson does as a filmmaker. It might not always work in every context.
Trying to make very, very specific type of aesthetic order to the world.
And I will say this, to the film's credit, however, it has a Japanese co-writer, Kunichi Nomura, and all of the Japanese characters, besides the dogs, are voiced by Japanese actors.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it has that on... Like, that's more than Kubo and the Two Strings can say.
That's for sure.
For whatever that's worth.
Kubo and the Two Strings
whether or not
had
that's a salve, I don't know.
Some Japanese actors.
Yeah, but it was
Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, and Charlize Theron. Again, the story is still good, but man, we just need to keep having this conversation.
Yeah,
and this is one where I kind of wish I could have written my review of this like a month after I saw it, because my perspective on this keeps changing. There's a lot of things I really love about it, and for a while I was really focused on all the things I love about Isle of Dogs. I think it's a really inventive motion picture. I think the action is bizarre and incredible, and the humor is funny, and it really touches on a lot of like actually good topics when it's not airballing other topics.
Right.
And man, this is a movie that I'm going to be really struggling with over time. I think initially I was high on it, but the more you think about it, and the more you listen to other voices about it, we talked about this before, we need as many voices as possible in critical culture.
Read Justin Chang's review. If you're going to see this movie, read Justin Chang's review. You might even want to read it beforehand. I know a lot of people don't like to read reviews ahead of seeing a film.
It's very spoiler heavy.
It's not spoiler heavy, but it puts ideas in your head. And especially when you're a critic, I don't like to read reviews before I see films. But you might want a little bit of perspective going in so you can judge for yourself how insensitive Wes Anderson might be. Now, to put an underline on it, you and I are both white, and our perspective is going to be a little different on this.
Sure.
So you have to take everything we're saying with a grain of salt.
Please
as well.
Please
do. Find Asian critics. There's a lot of great Asian American critics in the world, like Justin Chang, like Jen Yamato, like Ingu Kang, and they're going to have more salient things to say than we.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. Moving on. There's two more movies we're going to review this week, two more new movies, and I'm going to burn through them a little quick because I saw them and you didn't.
Okay.
The next film is called Final Portrait, and it is the latest film directed by Stanley Tucci.
Okay.
An estimable character actor, Oscar nominee for The Lovely Bones. You also know him from Captain America: The First Avenger. He played the doctor who invented the super soldier serum.
Right.
A lot of people know him from that movie. I want to put the image in your head so you think about Stanley Tucci. He has also directed a lot of very good independent movies, almost all of which are about sort of eccentric artists. His first film, which I think was co-directed with Campbell Scott, was...
That's like the indiest thing.
Co-directed with Campbell Scott.
Were Lily Taylor and Parker Posey also involved?
Sounds about right.
Did they write the screenplay?
It was about struggling Italian chefs who have a small hole-in-the-wall restaurant, and they're trying to make it big. And that's a great movie. I love that movie.
It's called Big Night.
Yep. He did a more farcical comedy about struggling actors in the 1930s called The Imposters, starring Stanley Tucci and Oliver Platt. And
that's a sloppy movie that I kind of love.
There's so many things that work in that movie. I'm willing to forgive a lot of the things that don't. He did a movie that I actually haven't seen in a really long time, but I remember liking, called Joe Gould's Secret, which is about a homeless guy.
It was like 2000 that came out. I remember seeing
it's like a homeless guy who's like writing this incredibly long work of literature, and Ian Holm plays Joe Gould in that movie, and his mannerisms and the way he looks exactly like my dad. My dad called me into the room and said, "Look, I'm on TV. It's weird." Super strange.
Being played by Sir Ian Holm.
So that's going on. He did another movie as well, but that doesn't quite fit the mold. But the majority of his directorial career has been about this. And in Final Portrait, he is doing it's a biopic about Giacomo. What's his name? Something Giacometti. Alonzo Giacometti?
Giacometti.
Okay. I'm going to look this up so I don't screw this up.
I know Giacometti.
Yeah, he's actually more famous as a sculptor, but this is a story about a painting he did. There was Alberto Giacometti.
Alberto.
I'm bad with names. This is a story about a painting he did. There was an art critic / writer named James Lord. True story. Went to one of Giacometti's gallery showings. Giacometti offered to paint a portrait of him. And we see, like, at the beginning of the movie, he's had other artists paint his portrait before. So he's very flattered, goes in, says, well, let's take a day or two. Giacometti sets him down. He's very particular. Giacometti is played by Jeffrey Rush. James Lord is played by Armie Hammer. And Giacometti does a little bit of work and then gets frustrated and says, fuck it, you can come back tomorrow, right? And Armie Hammer's like, sure.
This is like
1964.
Okay.
Armie Hammer comes back the next day. Giacometti sits him down, does almost nothing, and says, fuck it. The creative process. What are you going to do, right? Are they ever really finished? You can come back tomorrow, right? This goes on for weeks. Armie Hammer keeps having to change his travel plans. He's not even supposed to be in Paris.
That's funny.
He keeps calling. I guess it's a significant other, but we never see them. And it's just like, there's a farcical quality to the premise of this story. And again, it's a true story. That in a different movie could have been really funny. And it could have been a story about this guy just constantly having his life ruined by trying to indulge this artist. And I think Stanley Tucci is interested in that, but he's interested in that in a more serious way, and it never really becomes funny. It should be funny. It's a funny concept.
Yeah.
But it's not. Stanley Tucci seems to see this as some sort of mild tragedy. And here is this guy who obviously respects Giacometti as an artist, and we see his artwork. His artwork is brilliant. But Giacometti is, like a lot of eccentric artists, like really kind of indulgent and self-obsessed, and a combination of absolute self-hatred and total egotism. And whereas in his other films about struggling artists that was charming because they haven't succeeded, Giacometti is literally making so much money he doesn't know what to do with it all, and he just hides it around his studio like some kind of weird Easter egg hunt, and he no longer remembers where it all is. And it's not as fun anymore because now he has no excuse to be an asshole.
I guess it's about that sort of late period in an artist's career where they've said everything they need to say. They're struggling to remain creative. They're already really successful, so they have no hardship any longer. And there's nothing for an artist to do when they're in that spot. You've noticed, like, a lot of musicians do this. Like, let's take the career of Eminem and draw a parallel to Giacometti.
Sure.
A lot of Eminem's early songs were about struggling and coming up out of the slums of Detroit where he was raised, and trying to earn money and make a name for himself, but also fighting his dark impulses to be a criminal and an asshole.
Yeah.
And then he became successful, and he starts putting out records about being famous. And Taylor Swift is another one. She had these like kind of light, dumb, teen, poppy romance
very sincere,
but simple teen. Yeah, and then all of her more recent songs have been about how hard it is to be famous. Haters gonna hate. I'm dating famous people, and that's really rough. And it's about reacting to the way millions of people are now reacting to her because that's her experience.
See, that's valid, but I don't think that's what Final Portrait is about. I think Final Portrait is about finally coming to the place where we realize that we don't have to indulge artists just because they're artists. That's the lesson James Lord has to learn. He has to learn to just say, fuck it, it's done, because I'm going.
Yeah.
Like, that's the journey he's on. Will he ever get to that point? It's not about Giacometti, like, coming to any sort of meaningful revelation. Giacometti is who he is, and the things we discover about Giacometti as James Lord spends more time with him, and Giacometti gets more comfortable, and he starts telling about these horrific fantasies he's had in his life, and you start realizing that he's just an asshole with some talent. That's what he is. He's not this great, perfect, deified whatever. He's got some talent, and he's a total asshole. He mistreats people who are around him, and you don't have to put up with that. Some people do. He has a long-suffering wife who is frustrated because he's spending way more time with his mistress. And you get the impression that they have moments of genuine closeness in which that's enough for her. That you get the impression that that's what she's getting out of it, and it's worth the trouble. James Ward doesn't have that. He can just fucking go. And so it's a matter of, when do you stop hero worshiping this guy and just say, look, you're an asshole. Thanks for the painting. That's what it's all about. I think it's frustrating because the movie has an interesting salient point. I think we need to talk about this sort of culture in which we forgive artists for being assholes just because their art is good. That's really valid, and that's actually really timely, and it's really interesting that Jeffrey Rush is the face of that in this movie, because he has had his career there have been stories about him that haven't really come out in any detail. So it's really interesting that this happened, and it might actually make it kind of hard to watch, and I totally get that, but it's kind of fascinating that this was the project that came out afterwards. But again, from a tonal perspective, it could be funny, but it's not. It could be really tragic, but it's not. It could be a gut punch point of a movie. It's not. I think he's just interested in it and has this general idea of, like, finally crossing the line and when are eccentric artists just annoying. It's interesting, but I think he doesn't convey it with enough force, one way or another, dramatically, comedically, whatever, or irony, just whatever. It's just kind of there, and there's some good performances in it, and if it sounds kind of interesting to you, go see it, but doesn't quite work.
Sounds interesting to me.
Lastly, and I'm going to be real short on this because this movie sucks. There's a new film on Netflix called Game Over Man, from the folks who brought you Workaholics. A lot of people like the show Workaholics. I'll be honest, didn't find it funny.
Okay.
There's this school of comedy that these gentlemen indulge in, which is it's very loose, very crass, and very loud. And so
improvised, yeah.
Whether or not it's improvised, it doesn't feel rehearsed.
Okay.
And there's something about that where if you've ever been in like kind of like a lousy improv group where everyone's just trying to one up each other.
So an improv group, in other words. Hey-o!
Hey-o! Seriously though, like there's bad ways and good ways to do it, and this is just people screaming at each other for a lot of it and trying to be as offensive as possible, and they succeed. It's actually kind of a very hateful movie. The story is about these three assholes, played by, hold on a second, I'm gonna get their names.
Game Over. So named after the line of dialogue from Aliens, I imagine. Okay.
There's Anders Holm, Adam Devine, and Blake Anderson, and they play the cleaning staff at a posh hotel. And there's a huge party going on at the hotel with this incredibly rich guy who is famous for just throwing money at everything, is throwing a shindig, and they're going to work that shindig. And they decide they're going to get him to invest in one of their many get-rich-quick schemes. And one of the things they've got is called the Skin Tendo, which is basically you wear a full bodysuit and that controls the character. So you just made a Kinect needlessly expensive, and you just made motion capture suck. So it's not a good idea.
You made motion capture like you walked it back a few steps technologically. Okay.
There's a frustrating thing, and I appreciate this, where there's this weird creative difficulty in telling any story about a character who has a good idea.
Because you actually have to have a good idea.
If you don't have a good idea, immediately it makes your movie, like the case, a sense of farce. Like that movie, I think it's Envy with Jack Black, where his whole get-rich-quick scheme is a spray that sends dog poo to... No, it sends dog poo to another dimension.
Oh, jeez.
That's a stupid idea for anything.
Does it literally send it to another dimension, or did it just say it sends it to another dimension?
I saw the trailer. My point is... my point is...
I think it just dissolves poo.
I don't know, dude. Anyway... I digress. Someone's going to send us an email with a very detailed account of the plot of Envy, and good luck to you. We'll read it. We'll read one. If everyone sends us one, we'll read one of those. We're not going to do an entire episode with nothing but plot summaries of Envy, although that almost sounds funny. I digress. You have to come up with a good idea in order to make that idea seem like a good idea, and that's hard, because if you had that good idea, you'd just be a millionaire. So it's hard. I appreciate that. They get the money from the guy, and then a whole bunch of blah, 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 blah. Terrorists attack the hotel. They kidnap the rich guy, and now these asshole waiters who do things like, oh, hey, there's a used condom in this hotel room.
Let's your face.
Yeah, like that kind of, that's their level of maturity. And now it's up to them to save the day. So
somewhere between 13 and also 13.
Okay.
But filthy and crass.
It's a movie for immature people. And it's and here's the thing: immature people can have movies too. They deserve better movies than this.
Lord knows there are plenty of them.
Look, you can have immature humor, but like I don't like the idea of watching a movie that was made by immature people who don't seem to understand when it's funny and when it's just gross and horrifying. Like, imagine the worst possible college roommate you could possibly have. Multiply them by 3, give them their own movie in which they get to kill people and get naked. I really want to see that.
Here's the thing about humor about like immature, mean, or dumb people.
Yeah.
It has to be made by smart people.
Yes, I know that sounds ironic, and I'm not saying these guys are dumb. I'm really not. I don't know them. What I'm saying is that it feels like they're pandering rather than making a quality motion picture that just happens to be dumb. For example, Paul Blart Mall Cop.
The first one.
The first one. You know what? It's not that bad. I mean, it's not very good, but like the characters are actually kind of endearing. The plot kind of moves. It has a bunch of dumb jokes about a guy who's not very good at being in a dire situation, but it's actually made with a little bit of maturity, and so you don't have to feel guilty for it. But then you have Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, which is the same fucking thing, but mean-spirited and hateful. And here's a weird bit of synergy. Neil McDonough, the bad guy from Legends of Tomorrow, he plays the guy who takes over the hotel in Game Over Man and Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. That's a weird niche in which to find yourself, is that you're the guy who takes over hotels in bad action comedy.
We officially have a Neil McDonough type in the world of cinema.
Rona Mitra is in this.
He's been around for 30 years. He's been working a long time, Neil McDonough, but yeah.
Rona Mitra is in this as sort of the female assassin who works for him, and boy, does she deserve better material than this. I'm not saying she's the greatest actor ever, but like I've seen her be good in things. Like she's actually pretty good in Underworld 3 or Doomsday. And here she just gets to be this powerful woman. She gets to cut someone's penis off. So, good for her. But because I hated that character. Like that character, but like at the same time, because she is strong, all the men look up to her and resent her for everything. And like there's this ugly attitude about every relationship here, every harassing relationship, every weird sort of side-eye glance at any character who's gay. And it's just really an unpleasant motion picture. It's really bad. It's not funny. There's like one scene that's kind of funny, and then that's it.
There's your pull quote for the poster. An unpleasant motion picture.
Oh, at best. Like, there's one scene that's kind of funny, because all these guys are immature assholes, and now they've all got guns. So when they get in their huge, big squabbling argument, they start shooting at each other. Like, that's actually, kind of funny, because it's kind of unexpected, but it's also totally what they do. So there's something humorous there. It's also kind of taking the piss out of these characters. Here's the thing about these kind of underdog characters in a comedy. You have to want them to succeed. And within 5 minutes, I didn't. I wanted them to, I was watching this with my wife, and she was like, we want them to fail. We want them to hit rock bottom so that they can, because that's the only way they're going to grow. We can't keep telling them they're great. We want these characters in this movie to fail so hard.
For some reason, I'm thinking of Beavis and Butthead when you're describing this. Now, I like Beavis and Butthead. I liked the movie, the Beavis and Butthead movie. And you can tell it's Mike Judge is poking fun at that type of teenager that he probably met a lot of growing up in Texas. He's sort of like dumb teenage wastoids who can't think beyond, breasts and nachos. That's the only, they have two lobes in their brain, and one is breasts and one is nachos. Yeah. And those are, Beavis and Butthead are kind of loathsome characters. They're not role models by any stretch. There's a little bit of genuineness to them, but they're so unsophisticated that we kind of laugh at their very, very low ambitions.
I think we're supposed to pity them in some way.
We're supposed to pity them, and we can understand their milieu so much that we can understand when they have a success or when they have a failure. And the important thing is, they're not capable of learning lessons. And yet they're still really funny because we're able to laugh wholeheartedly at them. And also, like you said, pity their plight. And there's a little bit of heart to that. Not that they're, warm, empathetic characters, Beavis and Butthead, but we understand them well enough that we can understand when they think they've succeeded and when they think they've failed. And seeing that kind of outsider perspective is a good way to handle that dumb comedy.
Sure.
It's when you take these characters and you are supposed to think that they are funny and they're good bros and you want to hang out with those types of people that it becomes problematic. Yeah. I don't want to hang out with Beavis and Butthead.
Oh, God, no. Can you imagine how horrible that would be?
Imagine a live-action Beavis and Butthead. Oh, wait, I can. It's called Gummo. It's just, these terrible Harmony Korine type movies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I love watching them because I can kind of laugh at their plight while still enjoying their world.
In any case, Game Over Man does not get that paradigm right. So I don't recommend it. So on a critically acclaimed scale of C- to C+.
Okay.
C- being bad, C+ being good, C being Game Over Man gets a huge C-, and there's a good chance it'll end up on my worst films of the year list. It's really bad.
Do I need to see it kind of bad, or
no? I don't recommend it. Okay. I don't recommend it. It's. I'm going to spare you.
Okay.
All right. Final Portrait is also sadly a bit of a C-. There's good stuff in it, but like I just don't think it hits.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a shame, but and I like Stanley Tucci as a director, but this one's kind of a misfire.
Yeah.
Tell me about Isle of Dogs. What do you think?
Isle of Dogs, I'm going to give a C, just because it is balanced between a lot of really creativity and a lot of problematic cultural insensitivity.
Yeah.
One puts it into the C+, and one puts it deep into the C-. So I'm going to just break even, play it safe, and
when I wrote my review, I was very high on it, and I would have given it a definite C+. But where I am right now, and hearing all of the different perspectives on it is going down a bit. So I'm going to go with you and say it's a C, but it's a C with a lot of really exceptional stuff in it.
Yeah.
So we're going to have this conversation for a while. Let's see what we got here. Sherlock Gnomes.
It is the very definition of a C.
It's like right in the middle.
It does not vary from the middle one whit. It is right there, 5.0.
All right, and then lastly, Pacific Rim Uprising. I'm also going to give it a C. It's like it's a watchable kind of silly movie, and there's some cool bits in it, but it's also not very good. I
like it better than the first, but it's still a C.
I don't. I really like the first, even though I admit it has some flaws. And then that's that. And now it's time for the main event. What you're all here for?
You're here to hear us talk about a shark.
Dun dun.
A big rubbery shark.
Dun dun.
That's floating on a log. Oh wait, that's just Jaws: The Revenge.
Dun 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 dun.
Jaws came out in 1975, and it was the biggest movie of all time, quite literally. Jaws was the first film that was released nationwide.
And not only nationwide, because what happened was
nationwide, all on the same date. Now that's. Before this, films would open in big cities, and then they would tour. And this was happening as late as the early 70s. This is how a lot of films became big hits and remained playing for years and years at a time, because they would open in New York, but by the time they got to like a rinky-dink town in Kansas, they'd been playing for a year and a half.
Yeah, they didn't make 4,000 prints of something. Yeah. They made infinitely fewer and then just toured them around the country, and you waited for it to arrive to you because multiplexes weren't a thing.
So if you lived in a small town, like on the end of the circuit, you'd get a really beat-up print. There might be like a lot of frames missing. It'd be really scratched. And you are finally in a place where you can catch up with the zeitgeist. So enthusiasm remained high for a long time for a lot of these movies because people were constantly anticipating when it was going to come through their town.
When Jaws came out, and it's weird because when you think about it, Jaws doesn't feel like the biggest blockbuster ever. It's a horror story about a shark. But whatever, Steven Spielberg was riding high. It was a popular novel. So they decided to make this the test product.
I haven't read Peter Benchley's novel, but I hear it's not good.
There's a lot of things. I haven't read it either. I know a lot of stuff that's in it that's not in the movies. It sounds like Steven Spielberg did the best version of it. No. I digress. So they didn't just release it in theaters all across the country, and we're talking about hundreds of theaters, not thousands like we have now, hundreds. They also timed that for the first time with a huge television marketing campaign. Yeah. So it wasn't just about, go see Jaws, eventually. You'll see Jaws eventually, and it'll be good. It was, go see Jaws this weekend.
It's opening in your town.
Everyone can share this experience right now. You can go see Jaws right now. Let's go see Jaws. And fortunately, Jaws was a great movie, so it actually earned that hype, and that changed the way movies are distributed instantly. Like, just that was it. I mean, like, there were still rollouts, but like, and we still do that a little bit with some independent movies where they'll have a smaller limited release, build buzz, and then
LA and New York. But that's more like Oscar fare these days.
Yeah, this was the big blockbuster. Every movie.
Imagine if Avengers: Infinity War only opened in LA and New York. And you live in Oklahoma.
And it took a couple of months.
And you weren't going to be able to see it until next year.
Yeah. That sucks.
That's 1973.
Yeah, that's lame. So,
I don't think you still get to see it.
It's lame that you have to wait so long.
If you have friends in LA it's lame that they've seen it already and they're probably tired of it by the time you get to it.
And there's no social media and stuff, so people aren't ruining it left and right, which is probably also made it a little bit better. I digress. Jaws is based on a novel by Peter Benchley. You've probably already seen Jaws, but we're going to talk about it. It is the story of a resort community called Amity, based very closely on
Martha's Vineyard.
Martha's Vineyard. It's an affluent island off the coast of New England, and it's got a huge sort of beach-going tourist trade.
Yeah.
It's a summer. Tourist trade is going to keep the whole economy afloat. Everyone needs the beaches to be doing real well. Problem is, a great white shark has wandered into the waters and has started biting people.
And not just any great white shark, but a really, really big great white shark.
Like an unusually large shark.
It's not supernatural, it's not a mutant, but it is unnaturally large.
So it's a real danger, and it's not going to be easy to just sort of, you can't just stab it and it's going to die. Like, it's a big monster of a shark.
The main human character is played by Roy Scheider, and he's the local sheriff who tries to make sure that the beaches are safe. He goes to the mayor. The mayor says, hey, you know what? We got these shark attacks. We have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
I think we need to close the beaches.
And the mayor has to gauge, okay, if we close the beaches, we all lose money and the whole community fails. On the off chance someone gets killed by a shark. Really, though, what are the odds? We're going to send some hunting teams out to get the shark, and we won't worry about it anymore.
And you know what? They get a shark. A shark.
Yeah, wrong shark. So they open up the beaches, and people go to the beaches, and it turns out a bunch of people fucking die.
Well, the appearance of this shark attracts two people. It attracts Richard Dreyfuss, who's like a shark expert, and he's the most interesting character. I love Richard Dreyfuss.
I think Roy Scheider is a great interesting character too, but they're all interesting characters.
They're interesting characters.
That's one of the things I love about Jaws, is that all the characters are actually really interesting.
Well, and so he begins looking around for like what's going on. He sees the body and says, "This is no boating accident." And Steven Spielberg I almost called him Shakespeare. Steven Spielberg.
He's not that good.
He's not that good. He's made some stinkers. It takes a page from the monster movie playbook, the most important page from the monster movie playbook. You don't show your monster too much.
Yeah.
We see the results of what the monster does. The opening scene is somebody getting pulled underwater, but we don't see the creature.
And one of the great opening scares ever.
Yeah, like
really well filmed.
A topless woman is swimming around and just like, haha, like splashing, hey, naked man, come out and get me. What's that at my foot? And she begins screaming, and then she gets dragged through the water. We don't know what's under there.
Well, we know, we don't see it.
We don't see it. And,
we don't think it might be a giant squid. We know it's just a shark.
Wouldn't it be funny if that was the fake out?
Whoops.
Jaws. Oh, it's a squid. Beak. Actually, there was a movie called Beaks about killer birds, but I digress.
Yeah.
And I think this was one of those necessities the mother of invention moments, because
they had a mechanical shark and it broke down.
Yeah, if you can show your monster a lot, it's less scary.
Yeah.
If you show the results of what the monster can do, your imagination is making it bigger, and by the time you see it, it's scarier.
Well, it's also, and I think this is something that's really great, Jaws is really a masterwork of suspense. And it's interesting because the dilemma that is placed on the characters in Jaws is so simple, it shouldn't almost be a problem. We know that this is a killer shark movie. We know they should close the beach. Problem is they don't. So, like, for the first, 2/3 of the movie is just them wondering whether or not it's worth risking all these people dying. And we know from the audience that that's wrong, but it's one of the great films about sort of the hazards of capitalism.
Yeah, and imagine, like, seeing it for the first time. Like, you know there's a shark and you know somebody's going to die, but imagine, like, there's a scene on the 4th of July. Everybody floods to the beach, but they've heard there's a shark in the water. Nobody's going in the water.
Yeah,
and
it's a great bit.
And then Mayer's, like, sneaking around in the crowd saying, come on, people will listen to you. You should go in the water. And the guy gets up and is like, okay, fine.
Everyone's
eventually
looking at him like, is he going to get eaten by a shark?
He's the first one who goes out, and everybody's kind of eyeballing him, and then eventually everybody gets in the water.
Yeah, like, that's a great scene of suspense.
And then mayhem ensues. Yeah, that's something out of Hitchcock. It's fantastic.
It's really, really great. And I love that. I also love that this is really is a drama with a killer shark in it. You know, genre films didn't used to be necessarily quite so heavy on their genre elements. Like, a lot of action movies were dramas with 2 car chases in it.
They were, but only in the grindhouses. When when those exploitation movies, they realize people are coming here just to see the mayhem. So you have these really crappy movies that are loaded with sex and violence, don't have much in the way of character stories or even skill.
You're right. And I apologize if I made it seem like I was saying genre movies didn't used to be like this. What I'm saying is that you used to be able to be successful and really take it super seriously. I've heard some young people talk about seeing Jaws now and how it got built up a lot, and they're actually bored. And I'm like, how are you bored? Like, this is a movie is actually, it's a slow build, but like there are kills and there are exciting moments, and the shark like fucks up a whole dock, and like all that shit's really, really great. And meanwhile, we have this really great story. I think Martin Brody, Roy Scheider's character, is a really wonderful character. He's
a family man.
He's a family man. He's happily married, but their marriage is interesting, and they still find each other fun and exciting. And
in fact, there's a great moment at the beginning of Jaws 2, and we'll get to it, where they and it's a repeated line from the first Jaws, but where it's just they're kind of like eyeballing each other, saying, "Hey, you want to sneak off and just have
want to
sex?
get drunk and fool around?"
Yeah,
like, that's their thing.
Let's just have sex. It's like,
nice.
You guys are still into each other. That's so great.
Yeah, they have like 2 or 3 kids. Like, they're great. Right. But he's also the sheriff on an island, and he's afraid of the water.
Oh.
Which is a nice little thing that actually like gives him, so it's already this element of tension for him, and it's this thing he's never wanted to have to deal with ever. And he was like, it's a sleepy town. I'll never have to do anything. Most I'll have to do is be on the beach sometimes. It's fine. There'll never be a killer shark, right?
Yeah.
Whoops.
Well, so we have this great family man. We have this interesting obsessive scientist, and then we have Captain Ahab, played by Robert Shaw.
Well, his name is Quint.
His name is Quint, but he's essentially Captain Ahab. There's this big meeting of all of the townsfolk in one scene. It's like, I think we should kill it. I think we should leave it alone. And he like strikes a match on the bottom of his boot. Like, I can kill it for you for $1,000. Shark's gonna swallow you whole.
Oh my God, he gets all the best speeches in this movie.
He gets all the best speeches. He's a cartoon, and Spielberg knows exactly how to play that type of character. You know, let him be as big as he is, but make him just realistic enough that he could be a real person.
Yeah, and also, like, by the end, when they go out, they decide to hire Quint, and
this is the final third of the movie.
Yeah, it's a long. They don't just throw in an action sequence; they build to it. It's like becomes a whole different story. They get in the boat. They're with Quint, and they actually start bonding with Quint, and there's this really incredible scene where they're all like comparing their scars, and Quint tells this incredible story about the sinking of the USS Indianapolis and how all the like survivors were being eaten by sharks. It's terrifying. But they're getting to know this guy. They're getting to know each other. They're getting to become close. And they also, by the time the shark really attacks at the end, and one of the most incredible fucking endings ever, you also realize Quint is insane.
Yeah, he's out of his mind, and they're
all that bigness that makes him so magnetic also makes him a very dangerous human being.
They're all driving each other insane, and for this brief moment, it becomes about sort of the cabin fever of living on this boat and having this threat outside of you that they're not seeing. The shark is gone for a long time.
Yeah.
And yeah, when it finally does show up, it's such a surprise that, unfortunately it's one of those things where the clip has been shown in like highlight reels so many times that it's kind of ruined.
Because it was such a huge reveal, people felt the need to reference it constantly.
It's like the big reveal in Planet of the Apes. You know what it is now, even if you haven't seen the movie. But yeah, it is this really golden moment that comes out at the end of this really long sequence of these 3 men bonding and then driving each other nuts. Yeah.
And then right in the background while they're...
Well, the character isn't even looking at it.
Yeah, the character's chumming the water, he's looking at other people, and then the shark almost bites his hand off. Oh my God, it's such a great bit.
Yeah. And the whole last sequence is just tension and action in a way that Spielberg has now become really well known for doing, but was still kind of a novelty at the time.
It's worth remembering that Jaws was a very troubled production. It was they were writing it on the fly.
It's on the water too, which is always difficult to shoot on.
The sharks were breaking down. It went massively over time. Like if it were being made today, everyone would be saying this is going to be the biggest bomb ever because look what happened. Like all that shit you heard about the reshoots on Justice League, that was Jaws. The thing is, Jaws actually turned out to be one of the best movies ever and the biggest box office grosser of all time until like Star Wars came out, I think.
Yeah, until
a couple years later.
2 years, but
still.
Well, but it set the stage for something like Star Wars to take hold.
Yeah. So really, we live in the world Jaws made. And because Jaws was so incredibly popular, so incredibly successful, I think just one Academy Award?
Yeah, I think it was like
with score. The score won Best Academy Award.
John Williams, by the way, does at least 60% of the heavy lifting in this movie.
Oh my God, that Jaws score is one of the best things ever.
Not just the shark's theme, which everybody knows, but just his the way Spielberg and John Williams managed to use music to make they were able to have the banal moments, but make them feel really dramatic because they were scored a lot.
There's this adventurous theme when they get out on the water, and you could be like in any great classic pirate movie, you know?
There's a scene on the ship where they have to put Richard Dreyfuss in a cage so they can lower him down and they can lure the shark, and it's really scary. And they actually show them building the cage, and Richard Dreyfuss gets inside and they lower it in the water. Other filmmakers probably would have just played that straight, just showed the mechanics of it, no music, it's just this is what it looks like. John Williams is scoring the heck out of this scene. Like something really important and dangerous is about to happen, so you're really involved when Richard Dreyfuss gets in the cage and then the shark starts coming after him.
If Steven Spielberg is the person telling a scary story at a campfire, John Williams is the flashlight under his face. Like, he's really just amping it up in every way. And the best John Williams scores, there's a lot of like schools that thought like a score should get out of the way. John Williams tells the fucking story, and almost all the movies he scored are better for it.
I don't like scores where they get out of the way. I want to be able to notice it. And
it works either way. But
you can find this on YouTube. There's a really great scene where a film student took the climactic scene from E.T. And removed all of the music.
And it's a bad scene.
And replaced it just with the natural sound effects that would have occurred in that scene.
It's a bad, boring scene.
It's a bad, like, they hug, and there's this moment where they're not talking, they're just sort of looking at each other, and they look really bored. You hear like a dog barking in the distance, and there's crickets chirping, and everybody's like and they look really, but they're not saying anything, they're not making any noise, and the ship just sort of floats away. And it's like the most boring scene imaginable.
But it's not intended to be seen without the music. John Carpenter had a story about that, how I think he showed his producers like a cut of Halloween before the score was in there, and said it was the most boring thing ever, and I will never do that ever again.
Yeah.
Because that's another one where the score does a lot of the heavy lifting.
You at least need a scratch track. Come on.
Bit of a correction. Jaws was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and won 3 of them for Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. Or Best Dramatic Score. It was nominated for Best Picture and didn't win.
75 would have been Cuckoo's Nest.
Was Cuckoo's Nest. It was Cuckoo's Nest. Yeah, okay, so Jaws was such a huge hit, it only made sense that they would want to make another one. This is right after The Godfather Part 2. So they were just like, people like it when we follow up these huge blockbusters.
So a sequel, still kind of a novelty.
I mean, they were made, but like it was for like, you know, it was still cool to like to see a sequel, something like this.
I wonder what was the first film to like just add a Roman numeral, just add a
I think it was
numeral.
Godfather Part 2.
Godfather Part 2.
I think it was The Godfather Part 2, because before then it would be like Tarzan finds a mate, Tarzan goes to England, or they would always make a new title.
Tarzan goes Hawaiian.
But because I think part of the idea was you never knew for certain if people had seen the previous film. So with The Godfather and Jaws, you knew they had.
Right.
You knew they'd seen it. So you can just call it the second
significant film.
Call it the second chapter. It's fine. Anyway, so a few years passed. They want to do a sequel. Spielberg says, "No fucking way! I'm not doing that. That's a stupid idea." He made the shark movie. I said what I needed to say about sharks. So they ended up going to
1978.
Yep. They ended up making Jaws 2, which was directed by Jeannot Zwark.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce the director of Supergirl.
Yes, and other good films. No, to be fair,
Supergirl's the best film of all time, so we don't need to really go any much further.
I find Supergirl very enjoyable, but let's not go nuts.
He also did Somewhere in Time, which is a legitimately good movie.
He was actually replaced director John D. Hancock, who they had started shooting the movie, and it had a more dour quality. It was about how the city, how the town of Amity was kind of destroyed by the shark attack, and it was building itself back up again. And when the shark came back, they again couldn't admit that was happening, or else really destroy the town. I can see why they thought maybe it'd be a little repetitive. What they ended up turning it into, really, is a shitty slasher movie with a shark.
Indeed. So we're back with the same characters, and to be fair...
Richard Dreyfuss doesn't come back because he's on an expedition in the Antarctic.
We're back with Brody and his family.
Yeah, they actually say, like, we tried calling him, but he's on an expedition in the Antarctic. He won't be around for months. So that's, at least they addressed that elephant in the room, and of course, some characters were dead, but the Brody family is once again front and center.
And the one like really positive quality that Jaws 2 has is that it does capture that Spielbergian family dynamic. The way the kids bicker at each other, the way we see them at home a lot. The kids are a little older now, so they want to sneak out and have make-out parties on the water. And it's a lot about family tension and sort of how the family is breaking up a little bit. And that feels really kind of Spielbergian, and it feels like an organic progression from that family dynamic we saw in the first Jaws.
I'm going to fight you on that, because I think that's on the page. I don't think that comes
I was
across
about
in
to
the movie.
say, watching that, however, the way it was executed is really, really, really boring.
Yeah.
And then we know the shark is out there. We know what... We're a little bit curious as to how it survived. Turns out it just has a big scar on its cheek.
No, it's a different shark.
It's the same.
No, it's not. It's a different shark, because
it is a different shark.
The previous shark blew up. This is a new shark. It gets a scar on its cheek when it bites a boat at the beginning, and that boat gets set on fire. So that's how they differentiate the shark. So this shark looks different.
I thought it was the same shark.
No, you missed it. There's like this whole bit with like this woman who's like parasailing or something, and it bites the boat. The boat gets on fire, and with the shit.
But the problem with this shark is the shark in the first Jaws was just a shark. It was following whenever it came up to attack, it always had an organic reason to do so. It was hungry, it was going inside, there's this environmental man versus nature message going on. You understand that it is just an animal.
This is a Batman villain shark.
Yeah, this is Jason Voorhees the shark. They may as well have put the shark in a hockey mask. That would have been fun.
That would have been fun.
Well, of course, this was a couple years before Friday the 13th, the same year as Halloween. But yeah, it also has that sort of teleporting killer syndrome that you see in a lot of slashers, where it just sort of shows up wherever our protagonists happen to be.
Yeah.
And it can sort of zip back and forth between two locations and terrorize two groups of people simultaneously.
Yeah.
Just to be a dick, I guess.
It's another shark. It's also attacking, and they make the justification that there's like this power cable that goes to Amity under the water, and maybe it's attracting the sharks.
Like shark sonar, yeah.
Fine. Whatever, I don't care. It's fine. I accept it. Brody once again has to duel with the people running the town. They want to shut down the beaches. People, of course, die.
Duel. That's another Shakespeare. I did it again. Another Spielberg film.
Here's the thing with the movie though, is that the Brody plot is just a repetition of Jaws, but it's only about half the movie. The other half of the movie is with the most boring teenagers ever.
There's the white kid, and there's the white kid.
Yeah.
And there's the white kid, and there's a bunch of white kids, and none of them really have any personality traits. One's a little younger.
And when we say they're white kids, what we mean is that that's like all they've got. There's no character traits to them. The most they talk about is, I sure wish I was dating somebody. Yeah. Oh, you. Well, that's it. That's all they have to talk about. They have no desires. They have no interests. They have no personalities. They're just generic.
There's a way teenagers communicated in films of the late 70s and early 80s that a lot of people have nostalgia for, like that sort of Goonies thing where there was a lot of chatter, there's a lot of foul language, and it felt a lot more natural. And there's some of that going on in Jaws 2, where they're kind of crass with one another. They make jokes at one another's expense. They're not angels, and I can kind of appreciate that. But that doesn't give them personality.
When you look at like the teenagers, even in a Friday the 13th movie, like look at the teens in Friday the 13th Part 2 or 4, for example. Those teens have some personality.
One of them's played by Crispin Glover, for goodness sake.
They have some personality. They have some charm to them. Even when they're jerks in at least a somewhat interesting way. This is just shark food. That's all they are. They're just shark food with a face painted on it. I was so ready for all these kids to die because they offered nothing to the movie. My wife, bless her, watched this one with me, and she was just like, after a while, she just started screaming, "Hey, Jaws, get to snacking!" Because like you want these kids to die. You're sick of them.
The film is 2 full hours long. It doesn't need to be.
It's way
too long. It's way too much padding, and I understand that the director's trying to follow the same pace and mood as Spielberg, but they're not doing it nearly as well, and they don't have as much to work with, and they don't have
there.
Well, yeah, and the reveal of what the shark is capable of is something that was ruined in the first film.
Yeah.
So either you need Jawses, like many Jaws.
It's weird that they never did that. Like a bunch of Jawses? That'd be kind of
multiple
cool.
sharks, yeah.
Seems like a natural extension.
Because the movie is called Jaws, a lot of people call the shark Jaws. The shark doesn't have a name. They never give it a name.
And unofficially, it was called Bruce on the set of the original Jaws. Like, that was the name of the animatronic.
And it's a different shark, and then it's, different sharks as the series goes on.
I think they're all related because, as we find out in Jaws the Revenge, they get revenge.
Yeah.
They have a powerful instinct for revenge. Jaws 2...
When I was a kid, that confused me, because I thought the shark had died.
Yeah.
Like, it somehow survived the first film.
Yeah.
And then was killed in the second film. It was a different shark in the third film, and then it was the original shark again in Jaws the Revenge.
Yep.
No, that's not the thing.
Yep.
They refer to the shark as he, so I'm guessing it's a male, but in Jaws the Revenge they refer to it as a she. So
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't give a shit. Jaws 2.
They knew it's like an orca.
Jaws 2 is frequently considered like the best Jaws sequel because it has that kind of slasher vibe. I'm going to fight you on that right now. This is the worst Jaws movie because it is boring and repetitious.
Happening.
There's a couple of neat shark bits. There's a bit where a shark like eats a helicopter.
No,
like that was kind of fun.
Jaws: The Revenge is the worst Jaws.
I have some defense for Jaws: The Revenge. We're gonna get to that in a minute.
Well, but first we'll do Jaws 3D.
Jaws 3D is the 3D one, and what's weird about this one? There's a couple of weird things about this one. When they started to do Jaws 3D, one of the original ideas they had was to do a spoof. It was going to be called Jaws 3 Humans 0.
Yeah,
that was
a great idea.
That was one of the pitches. I've never seen a franchise turn into self-satire that hard. Can you imagine if like the next Star Wars movie, official Star Wars movie, was an airplane
movie?
Yeah, with Spaceballs. Like you couldn't do that. They nixed it. They said no, but like the fact that they thought about it for a bit is just kind of bizarre and weird. So what they ended up doing was they ended up getting a director named Joe Alves, or Alvis. I'm actually not 100% sure how to pronounce it. He was the production designer on the original Jaws. This is the only movie he ever directed. And they decided to make a movie about Jaws at SeaWorld. Yeah. Now, normally when you do a movie set...
Which is Jurassic Park.
Steven Spielberg ripping off Jaws 3D.
I made Jaws, but I don't want to remake Jaws when I do. Wait a minute.
So they made this
Jaws 3D thing is great.
So they made this movie, and what's weird about it is that it's actually SeaWorld. It's not like, Wally World or something at National Lampoon. SeaWorld signed off on this. And here's what happens at SeaWorld in this movie. They mistreat the animals and they die. They endanger the tourists and get them all killed. This makes SeaWorld look terrible.
Their star attraction, turns out it breaks down and can kill many, many people.
It's astounding to me that SeaWorld was okay with this.
And it's a disaster film more than it is anything. And the disaster genre was gone by the early 80s. This was like...
It was vestigial. There were bits. But like
Earthquake and the Poseidon Adventure were that whole wave was already behind us, I think. Maybe there were some in the early 80s.
There were a few, but it was dying out. The popularity was waning.
Yeah, so it's less an animal attack film than it is a disaster movie. I like all of the actors in this. I just wish that it was a better movie.
Well, I'm actually very fond of this movie because as stupid as it is, and it is stupid, it's very entertaining. And I think it's entertaining in the way it's trying to be. I think it's fast-paced. I think it's kind of shockingly violent. There's actually a lot of really gross gore in it.
Well, and it's 3D, so there's a lot of
like right in your face,
right in your face kind of stuff. There's a scene early on where somebody gets their like eaten and their severed arm is like floating in the water, and it's supposed to float when you're. I've actually seen this in 3D on the big screen, and it like floats out really close to your eyes.
And it lingers for forever. The 3D effects are stupid, but not even that. Like there's a scene where they find someone who's been eaten by a shark, and they whip off the tarp, and it's a close up.
And it's like it's like missing all its skin in one
really
scene.
Gross.
Yeah.
Like it's super gross. Like it's a violent movie. The plot is Dennis Quaid plays Roy Scheider's oldest son, who is now working as like a marine biologist or some sort of ocean.
He's an engineer.
He's an engineer. He's working.
He doesn't care about the animals. He's just an engineer.
He does on the fourth one, but I digress. Dennis Quaid plays the son of Roy Scheider. He's working at SeaWorld. His younger brother, Sean Brody, played in this movie by John Putch. He's afraid of the water, but he goes to visit his brother anyway, and he meets, and I think her screen debut, Leah Thompson.
Yeah.
From Back to the Future and Red Dawn.
That's the comely, flirty young teen. And
she's great.
She's fantastic.
She has nothing but charisma. You can see she was going to be huge.
Not only like flirty and fun, but really charismatic.
Just a really likable character. But what happens is they've got like this sort of gate to the sea, and a shark winds up in this huge moat attraction where people can wander through the water in these underwater tunnels, and a shark ends up in there, and they don't realize it until it's kind of too late. Someone dies, but they realize they have a shark in captivity, and no one's ever had that before. They're going to turn into a star attraction. Lou Gossett Jr., who had just come off of his big Oscar win for An Officer and a Gentleman, plays the owner of SeaWorld.
He plays the mayor of Amity Beach, is what he is.
Yeah, he's the guy who gets everyone killed, but he means well. Simon McCorkindale from Manimal is in this.
Yeah, he is.
If you don't remember Manimal is a show we covered on our other podcast, Canceled Too Soon. It's one of the most notoriously failed shows ever, and it stars Simon McCorkindale as a criminologist who also turns into animals. Any animal!
or the animals they could get a hold of that episode.
Well, theoretically, any animal.
It was really a low budget show.
It's a bad show.
It's not good. But Simon McCorkindale is freaking great.
He's really charming.
He
described him as like they carved off slices of Simon McCorkindale to make Aaron Eckhart and Scott Bakula.
And Scott Bakula. He's 2 years older than Scott Bakula, and I have a theory that he was like playing around in whatever magical primordial pond he was raised in that gave him all of his charm. And like little pieces of him sort of broke off and they swam out into the woods and they evolved into Scott Bakula and Aaron Eckhart. He's in that school. And he plays a British journalist who is also, like Louis Gossett Jr., has a lot of invested in keeping the shark alive and sort of keeping the story going and following what's going on without necessarily helping.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you know it, the shark runs amok and begins breaking stuff, and the last half of the movie is after there's an underwater passage.
Well, hold on, you're missing the point. Is the shark dies in captivity, and that's when we realize that's not Jaws. Jaws is the mama shark, and you just killed her baby, and now she's pissed.
Excuse me.
And she's killing everything and destroying equipment, and everything's gonna die, and it's great.
It's just an angry shark.
One thing I love in all the Jaws sequels is that whenever someone dies, the shark doesn't just bite them. The shark also bites what I only assume is a large baggie of Kool-Aid they had on their person. Because everyone's always just suddenly surrounded by pink water. It's not blood. It's obviously not blood. It's obviously a Kool-Aid packet that they got burst.
I'm not sure if you know how sharks attack. If you've seen like a surfer who survived a shark attack, they usually have a big like bite mark in their side, like from under their armpit down to their waist. And it turns out that's the way sharks kill their prey, and they like seals. They come up from underneath a seal, they bite them on the side and wait for them to bleed out, and then they eat them.
Yeah.
They don't eat the seals alive. Why would you eat something while it's still thrashing around?
Yeah, it's easier that way.
Yeah, so, and you know, if sharks don't have very good vision, so if you're looking up at a surfer who's laying down on a surfboard paddling, and you don't have very good vision, that looks a little bit like a seal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you think that's food, that's why surfers get attacked.
Yeah.
It's not because sharks are particularly vicious or they have, a taste for surfers.
Well, and allegedly, Peter Benchley actually felt really guilty about writing Jaws because he kind of demonized sharks way more than they ever really needed to be.
Actually kind of gentle animals.
They're carnivores, but they're not that much of a threat. Like, they don't actually eat people that often. Like, it's really uncommon, so these movies had a real negative consequence.
A lot of people just started hunting sharks for fun, and nobody cared because, thanks to the movie Jaws, everyone thought they were just monsters.
And really,
these are fish. Just leave them alone.
There's one recurring plot through like all of the Jaws movies, which is that people are assholes. And what happens with the shark attacks in SeaWorld is that you see this en masse. Everyone who attends SeaWorld in this movie is an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, guys run around saying, there's a shark in the water, get out of here. And the guy, like, knocks over someone's snack, and that guy punches the hero in the face. Like, someone knocks over a popcorn cart, and kids scurry to the popcorn like rats.
We were at the end of the millennium in the early 80s. Everything was going to hell.
Yeah.
People were just in survivalist mode.
It's a dumb movie. I like that there's this... Oh, I forgot to mention, in Jaws 2... Jaws eats an orca.
That's right.
As revenge for the movie Orca, when Orca took down a killer a great white shark at the beginning. So Jaws got his revenge on Orca, but in Jaws 3, dolphins get their revenge on Jaws.
That's right.
By like punching Jaws with their beaks. And the movie ends with the greatest freeze frame ever, where Dennis Quaid and I forget who played
Bess Armstrong.
Bess Armstrong, who's actually really great in this. They've survived. They're in this pool at SeaWorld. And like, oh God, are the dolphins okay? And then the dolphins both jump out of the water in like the sides of the frame. And then it freeze frames with them going, yeah! And it's one of the best closing freeze frames. It's like right up there with the 400 blows. Just one of the best closing freeze frames I've ever seen. It's so great.
And the dolphin looks at the camera and what is it feeling in that moment?
It's up to you, the audience, to decide. All right, so Jaws 3D, God. It's not good, but it's very entertaining, and I like it more than any other Jaws sequel.
It's entertainingly bad.
Yeah,
Jaws: The Revenge.
But I think it's doing what it was trying to do, and it actually bothers me. I think Joe Alves should have directed another movie because he does what he needed to do. He made a fast-paced, engaging movie with some fun performances. He did the best he could with that material. I defy any director to take that script and make a much better movie.
And this was in 3D, and this was... Ever since Avatar, the studios have been trying to get audiences to take 3D really seriously as sort of like an artistic choice.
Yeah.
Whereas we all know the truth. That is a gimmick through and through.
Some movies have done it. It's like you could like maybe 10.
Maybe Avatar.
What was that? Wim Wenders documentary about the dancer.
Oh, Pina.
Wim Wenders, not Wim Wenders. Werner Herzog made that documentary about the caves. So you can really get
Cave,
into
Cave
depth.
of Forgotten Dreams.
I think Gravity uses depth really well. There's a few.
There's been a few.
Mostly it's a cash grab.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, to be fair.
And if you're going to use it as a gimmick, which is what it is in its heart, channeling the spirit of William Castle, I think it's fair to use really trashy material and enhance it with 3D rather than try to get us to think 3D is some sort of big aesthetic move forward.
Right.
So Jaws 3D, as a result, has that trashy feeling to it.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if the 3D did it or if it was coming to match the 3D, but that's what we have. Right. It's an exploitation movie. We've gone from this really well-crafted blockbuster and really well marketed, to be perfectly fair, but perfectly crafted blockbuster,
the original Jaws
suspense film, to cheap exploitation.
Yeah.
Fast forward to the end of the 80s. Everyone's tired.
Yep.
We don't need another Jaws movie.
But we get one anyway in 1987 with Jaws: The Revenge. Jaws: The Revenge was directed by Joseph Sargent. Joseph Sargent is one of my favorite directors, not because he made a bunch of good movies, but because he only made one good movie. Like, he made a couple of adequate genre films, like White Lightning or whatever. He did a lot of TV, he directed some episodes of Star Trek, but he made a whole bunch of crap, and he made the original Taking of Pelham 123, which is one of the best crime movies ever made.
The Taking of Pelham 123 is...
all-time classic
excellent
motion picture.
Yeah.
All-time classic motion picture. Everyone should see it. It's great. Most of his career was crap. It's so fascinating to me that he made one classic movie and a bunch of Jaws: The Revenge is one of his but I think it's a little bit more interesting than people give it credit for.
Even though the mom is psychic now?
The mom is psychic now. So, Roy Scheider, who hated making Jaws 2, only did it for a contractual dispute, and apparently... the rumor goes he took the role in the movie Blue Thunder, which is this helicopter action movie, specifically because it would make him contractually unavailable to be in Jaws 3D. Like, he really didn't want to be in any more of those
whatever
stupid
I can
fucking movies.
get.
He was done.
As far away from the set as possible.
But who they could get was Lorraine Gary, who played his wife in Jaws 1 and Jaws 2, and she was AWOL for 3. And one of the things I appreciate is that regardless of all the stupid shark shit, Lorraine Gary's a really good actor.
She's a good actress.
I really like her, and it's kind of nice to see her take center stage. And I like that.
And we believe her drama. In Jaws: The Revenge, Roy Scheider died of a heart attack. She claims he died of fear.
He was so afraid of
He was so afraid of the shark that he just had a heart attack one day.
But like,
and
her family has been ruined by repeated tragedy.
Yeah, and she's afraid that the shark might be after her family. I wish I could just play Richard Jeni's bit.
He has a really great bit about stupid Jaws: The Revenge.
Comedian Richard Jeni has a really fantastic bit about Jaws: The Revenge.
Yeah, because the whole thing is...
look it up. Just the idiocy of the plan and the plotting.
The shark is... she thinks the shark's getting revenge on her family, so she goes to the Bahamas. That's what it boils down to. Go inland. Just don't go to the beach. It's not going to get in a car and find you.
Yeah, Richard Jeni's joke is, wouldn't an apartment building protect you from a shark, even if it was a really ambitious shark?
You don't need all this bullshit. I digress. So, at the beginning of the movie, she's like getting her life together, and her youngest son is now the sheriff of Amity. Okay. He is killed in actually a pretty scary opening sequence where he's murdered, but no one hears him because they're having like a Christmas party. He's killed by a shark. Okay.
It's a Christmas movie.
It is a Christmas movie.
Christmas and New Year's takes place over that week.
He's killed by a shark and no one notices because they're having a Christmas party. That's actually kind of scary. Okay. She is freaked out because another one?
Yeah,
another. Okay. How many people can a shark kill?
Why? There's sharks here. Why do we keep going in the water? So she wants to move away from the water.
She's sick of it always. And this is one of those movies, kind of like Die Hard 2, where they kind of just have to lampshade. How often can this happen? Yeah. So their solution is she feels cursed. She feels that their family is cursed and that sharks are out to get them. Her son, her oldest son, he used to be played by Dennis Quaid and is now played by Lance Guest, an actor I really like, and I don't understand why he wasn't a bigger star. Between this and, I mean, granted, this wasn't a hit movie, but he's good in it. The Last Starfighter, he was great in. Halloween 2, he was in good
respectable-ish genre movies.
And he was always really great. He's a handsome actor. I just don't understand it. Like, if he were around today, he'd be like Chris Evans. Like, people would just love him. He's so cool. So he plays the oldest son again. He's got a wife and a young daughter.
And now he's a marine biologist rather than an engineer. But
I got the impression he was like going into marine biology in Jaws 3, but whatever, who cares? He's studying sea snails in the Bahamas. we.
With Mario Van Peebles.
How exciting. And he goes to visit mom after his brother dies. And of course, he can't deny that's a hell of a fucking coincidence. You know what you need to do, Mom? You need to get away from it all. You need to get away from the sharks. Come to the Bahamas. And his argument is actually valid. Sharks don't go there because it's too warm.
It's warm water.
Great white sharks aren't in the Bahamas.
No sharks swim through the Bahamas.
I don't know how true that is, but it sounds good.
We have
there you go.
Conchs and snails, and that's pretty much it.
So she goes to the Bahamas, and there she meets Michael Caine. Michael Caine, who I'm going to paraphrase him. When someone asked him about Jaws the Revenge later in his career, he said, I never saw Jaws the Revenge, but I did see the garage it paid for, and it's great. He's doing it for the paycheck. But almost all of his scenes, except for like right at the end, it's just him and Lorraine Gary. Her husband died a few years ago. He's a charming bit of a cad, but he's very nice. And a lot of the movie is just them dating and not sure if at their age, because they're both in their 50s, they're ready to date. And all their scenes, just take the shark out of it. There's a good movie that's just them falling in love and Lance Guest like kind of uncomfortable with her mom falling in love again after his dad died. All of that stuff is actually pretty well handled. I like that bit. They're very human.
Again, like you said earlier, on the page, there's a good idea. There's like, or maybe a good like walk and talk film where these people just sort of figure out who they are and where they want to date. I feel like Michael Caine is just sleepwalking through this. I think
he's laid back. He
is British man, and that's what he has going for him.
I think his whole thing is he's laid back. He's not intense, and she needs that right now in her life. He's this kind of smarmy guy who maybe she wouldn't have dated 20 years ago, but now she wants someone who doesn't have tons of baggage. And I just bought their relationship. I think they're good actors, and their scenes together are, kind of underwritten, but they're good together. And I like that.
I like that they go to a Junkanoo festival.
That's fun. Yeah. And then, of course, the shark follows them to the Bahamas.
Figures out where they are.
How did it know? It's so stupid. But the shark follows them to the Bahamas.
It swam 3,000 miles to the Bahamas to keep stalking the same family.
And every time it attacks, Lorraine Gary has like a psychic vision of the shark. Of the shark,
yeah. She has a shark sense. Because she too was bitten by a shark, but it was a radioactive shark, and now she's psychically linked to sharks.
So while they're
it's a prequel to Aquaman.
So while they're doing their sea snail research, Lance Guest is attacked by a shark, and he's like, we can't tell my mom.
This would freak her out.
But they keep getting attacked by the shark, and after a while, the shark attacks other people, and his wife was just like, you didn't tell anyone there was a fucking shark in the water? It's like, I was thinking, you know what, you're right, I'm an asshole. I'm an asshole. This is kind of on me. So what happens is the shark attacks the beach, and Lorraine Gary, there's a great bit where once everyone's like out of the beach, Lorraine Gary's like looking at the water, and then she turns around, she's like fucking Linda Hamilton in the Terminator, she's like, fuck it, walks away, cool blonde panning shot, and I think she's gonna kill the shark, but then I realize she's gonna feed herself to the shark to end the curse.
Yeah.
And there's something about that where, again, here's at the center of Jaws the Revenge, for all its stupidness, I like her character because her character is really damaged, and she's doing her best.
She's trapped right in the middle of a stupid idea about a shark that wants revenge on a single family.
And she's almost making it work.
Psychic.
She's almost making it work because the
level of idiocy is a little too much to cut through to make that feel even plausible.
I think it's not about being plausible. It's about here's just bizarre, stupid shit keeps happening to the same person, and she's trying to make a sense of it as best she can. She is the victim of the franchise because she's just like this. She's like this pawn. We talked about in the Pacific Rim Uprising bit about how Malcolm Moore got turned into a plot point. She was turned into a plot point, and then finally in the fourth film, it's actually about what being a plot point has done to her as a person. And I like her performance. I like her character. I like that this is like a 50-something-year-old woman who gets to suddenly star in the Jaws movie and have a love story with Michael Caine. Like, this is actually like almost kind of good, except the premise is fucking stupid.
And they also had to do a lot of that probably to cover up the fact that the shark special effects are just like outwardly terrible.
I don't think it moves in this one. There's a lot of the shark just sitting there.
I think there was like some problems during production, like like in the first film, the first shark they built didn't work, and the shark they ended up building didn't move a lot. Like it could move its head back and forth a little bit and open and close its jaws a little bit. And if you've read Roger Ebert's like 1-star review of Jaws the Revenge, it's hilarious because he talks about how it looks like it's just it's being held up by the boats rather than attacking them. It's just sort of
Yeah.
resting on the deck, kind of thrashing about, and people are jumping into its mouth because they got nothing else.
There's alternate endings of this thing. Like in the theatrical version, I think Mario Van Peebles dies, but in the home video version, he doesn't, or vice versa.
Yeah,
there's one where the shark gets impaled and explodes. There's one where it just gets impaled.
Well, there's one,
I don't know anymore.
There's one where it gets impaled, and as it's bleeding out, everybody swims away. And people said, well, that's not dramatic enough. So in the final version, it gets impaled.
And it just blows
And then
up instantly.
It just sort of blows up because sharks, I guess, are like cars in action movies. You turn them upside down, they just explode.
Like you do. My favorite thing about Jaws: The Revenge, other than Lorraine Garrett, who I just think is really good, there is a TV version they used to play that added an opening voiceover. Okay, so
have you seen it?
I saw a clip of it online. Someone also made a trance remix of it, which is really hilarious. I'm gonna read this out to you. Now, this is just over like the water of like the shark swimming over to Amityville, ready to get his revenge for all shark kind on the Brody family. This is the voiceover that they suddenly thought was necessary. This is going to fix the film.
Okay.
Since time immemorial, events have taken place with no evident reason for their happening. Such
events. Sorry, I'll let you go.
Such phenomena has been man's dilemma and the subject of constant philosophical discussion. When there is no factor motivating an event, no case of cause creating effect, what triggered the action? Fate or circumstance? What you are about to see concerns such an event. Maybe you can determine whether we are dealing here with circumstances or fate. So
the film is admitting right up front, look, we don't know.
It's a stupid. This is an opening monologue Ed Wood would write. It's got that circular dialogue. That circular. Keep using the same words that mean nothing.
Future events such as these will affect you in the future.
Yeah. It's one of the worst speeches I've ever seen in anything ever.
Does Criswell read it at a desk?
I would hope so. Like, I wanted to, like, in the water.
Yeah.
Just like,
in his suit, yeah.
Since time immemorial. The Jaws franchise is kind of noteworthy because the first film is one of the best movies ever made, period. Maybe it's not in the top 10, but it's certainly in the top 100 or something. Like, it's really great.
Often cited as one of the best.
Certainly.
At the very least, maybe the single most important action blockbuster for many, many decades.
For the industry, anyway.
Until, or Star Wars, I guess. It's right next to Star Wars.
Those are the two.
Yeah.
And the sequels are so bad.
Yeah.
Like, so again, 2 is boring and long and bad. 3 is stupid but entertaining, I think. 4, I think there's a couple of things I like in it, but it's really dumb.
Really
it's maybe one of the dumbest ideas for a sequel ever.
And it's super cheap, too. It's like a super low budget.
Yeah,
so,
it's saved by a couple of good actors,
it's like
Lance Guest, Lorraine Gary, Michael Caine, but that's it.
We like to think of like gigantic franchises, big packages of movies as being sort of unassailable when you take them as a whole. And when you look at a lot of long-running film series, they tend to average out pretty low.
Yeah.
It's hard to find one that is just pretty solid all the way through, that doesn't have like a lot of low points to talk about.
There's a few.
But, I was just like, I love the Halloween series. No, you love Halloween.
I think Halloween, there's some spotty bits.
Halloween 2 is pretty good. Halloween 3 is
fun for what it is.
Interesting film.
I like Halloween. I think Halloween 3 is fun. I think Halloween 4 is underrated. I think Halloween H2O is pretty good.
Overall, those films are pretty terrible.
They're spotty.
They're spotty at best.
Yeah.
Even Star Wars. Everyone loves Star Wars. It's a good film. I like Star Wars. Everyone has lost their mind about The Empire Strikes Back. I like Star Wars better. I'm the only one.
It's still a great movie.
It's still fine. I'm not going to disparage The Empire Strikes Back.
Jedi is
arguable at best. There was a holiday special in there which cancels out pretty much everything.
It's so fucking bad.
There were 2 Ewok movies that people don't even acknowledge their existence of because people just don't like to acknowledge the bad ones.
And the second one's actually not bad. The second one's actually a fun movie.
Is that the one with the evil wizard, or was that the one with Wilford Brimley?
Wilford Brimley is the one with the evil wizard.
Oh, that's right. Jeez.
Yeah, no, the first one was the one with the giant who kidnaps the parents, and then the second one, all but one of the characters in the original movie dies in the first scene in a horrible massacre, and then they have to fight a wizard.
Yeah.
Second one's fun. It's not a great movie, but it's fun.
But keep in mind, that's also Star Wars.
It sure is.
Little teddy bears versus an evil wizard in a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
Then there were the 4 prequel films, which people don't like. Some people are apologizing for them now, but they're not good.
There were some things about them that were kind of interesting, but dramatically they're terrible.
The Force Awakens came out. Again, that one's kind of arguable. A lot of people are kind of against it.
I like it a lot. I think
Rogue One is terrible. I hate that movie.
I think that's an exaggeration. I think it's not very good.
I really hate that movie.
There are things I like about it.
Okay, and the last one was like the first interesting one in a long time.
Yeah.
Whether or not you liked it, I think it's interesting. It does new stuff. Thank God. And so yeah, you average out all that stuff. It's kind of spotty.
Yeah.
It's above average at best when you kind of push them all together.
But like Jaws, there's really only one
there's
good
one great one, and the rest all stink. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing. So next month, we're going to be doing something really different. We're going to have an April Fool's month, sort of. And how we're going to do it here at Critically Acclaimed, where normally you vote for the most notorious films, and then we find a great film to match it. For the month of April, it's going to be the opposite, and we're going to give you a list of some of the best films ever made, and we're going to review the one you pick, and then we're going to add a super bad movie to review with it.
Pair it with a terrible movie that sort of reflects it. I'm guessing we're going to be going to like a lot of rip-offs.
We'll see.
Like a lot of echoes, but we'll see. We'll see how it works out. But the franchise poll has already gone up, and there's already been a lot of votes in it, in fact.
And it was a clear winner. The Godfather trilogy is what we'll be reviewing at the end of April.
You should have voted for the Apu trilogy, but I'm not going to shame you.
You know what? Every time you vote for the obvious choice, you're taking an obvious choice off the table, and eventually we're going to be doing nothing but weird shit. So that's your choice.
And I can't wait.
But for the first week in April, we're going to pick films. All of your options are films that have been, at one time or another, and with some validity, declared the greatest movie of all time.
That's right.
Your options are, and you can vote for this on the Schmoville ! Facebook page right now. Citizen Kane, and you probably have heard of it.
You know it.
It's a fictionalized biography of William Randolph Hearst, written and directed by and starring Orson Welles. Persona, one of the most fascinating and experimental psychological movies ever, directed by Ingmar Bergman.
One of my personal favorites.
The Rules of the Game, which before Citizen Kane was crowned, was considered the best movie ever made by a lot of people. Yeah. Directed by Jean Renoir, and is a great and fascinating drama/comedy about class distinctions at a party. Between
a bunch of rich people and their servants at this gigantic party in a big mansion. It is so well filmed.
If you've ever seen Gosford Park is like the lesser version of Rules of the Game.
Yeah. Rules of the Game Junior.
Seven Samurai, directed by Akira Kurosawa. We actually had to pick a couple of Akira Kurosawa movies and just find one of them. It's like between this and Rashomon.
And
we picked Seven Samurai.
It's kind of they're both great, so I can't really disparage either.
They're both really much pictures, but Seven Samurai is kind of wrote the script on how every action movie that followed it would exist.
The genre of action, like as we know it today, wouldn't exist without Seven Samurai.
No, it would be a very different beast. And then lastly, we have Ozu's brilliant, understated, absolutely incredible, but rarely talked about outside of like film critic circles, Tokyo Story, which is a subtle drama set in Tokyo.
Family drama about relationships kind of falling apart in a lot of static shots with no dialogue. It's great.
And I want to remind you that, the most obvious choice, we love all these movies, and we'll talk the hell out of all of them. The most obvious choice isn't necessarily the most interesting choice. So before you vote, you might actually want to look them up a little bit, maybe watch a trailer or something online, read some criticism. Consider your options. Don't just go for the one you've heard of.
Yeah.
However, we'll do whatever you vote for, however you decide to vote for it.
I imagine stuff like Tokyo Story and The Rules of the Game aren't as, we're film critics, we run in film critic circles, we've gone to film schools, we know what those films are pretty intimately.
Yeah.
But, I didn't know what those films were when I was maybe 16 or so, when I was in high school, or before I really started getting into film in earnest.
Yeah.
And they're definitely worth looking up. So even if you don't vote for it, you should probably just watch it anyway.
You should see all those movies.
Those are all great movies.
You should see all the movies we just listed. They're all indispensable and important films.
Pieces of world cinema.
Yeah, they're brilliant and they're influential and they're exciting and they're great. So we will do that next week. And yeah, and unfortunately that is the episode because Witney has to go to work. But
so sorry. You know what? We'll have to rally and do like a letters only episode, or just have a especially long episode next week where we just do all of our letters.
we will do one or both of those.
We do like having you write in, and we're so sorry that I think this is our third or maybe fourth week in a row where we've just run short on time and haven't had a chance to read your letters.
Yeah,
we are reading your letters. We are seeing them, and we do plan on reading them and answering your questions.
Yeah,
because
so
we like interacting with you.
So we will read a lot of them next time, or we'll do a bonus episode. Stick around on the Schmoes Know iTunes feed or the SK Plus YouTube channel for more of that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Again, we'll be back next week with the film you choose for the poll. We also have, what else are we reviewing next week? Oh, it's a weird week. Well, because we got Ready Player One, obviously. But we also have God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness, and Tyler Perry's Acrimony.
Can't wait for Tyler Perry's Acrimony.
Oh, it's going to be awesome.
Oh God, Ready Player One. We'll see.
We'll see. Always hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
However much I'm dreading it, as a professional, it is my job, as the lights are going down, to shed all of that and let the film say what it has to say.
Anyway, so don't forget, you can check us out on Twitter. I'm at William Bibbiani.
I'm at Witney Seibold.
We also have another podcast, Canceled Too Soon, where we review television series that last one season or less. March is Cops with Robot Partners Month, and this week we're reviewing Total Recall 2070, a sci-fi series that posited what if Blade Runner and Total Recall happened at the same time in the same universe.
Here's a hint. It stinks.
Shut up! You're ruining it. You're ruining it for everybody. I had more fun with it than he did. But you can listen to that. That's on iTunes as well. It's not on the Schmoes Know feed. So thank you, everybody, for listening. We will be back next week, and never forget, everyone's a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?